board members and a student representative present. And I was going to ask Joanna and Faith if they would be interested in providing the ops reports on the early side, so if you didn't want to stay to bed, you didn't have to, since ops is not there.
It's one of those things we added. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Okay.
I can make one up if Joanna has
Jump Paul?
Yeah, let me shut this door so we can actually hear. So we'll start then with some of the administrative items, which is strategic plan and bylaws. And I have an updated version of strategic plan for everyone. One of the things that I sort of wanted to get started with a discussion is I put a new mission for the state board on the top. It reflects a little bit more about what the discussions that we had at our strategic planning session, as well as reflects a little bit more about what the priorities are in our strategic plan. So the new mission would be, it is the mission of the State Board of Education to promote equity and achievement in the District of Columbia public education through policy leadership, engagement, support, advocacy, and oversight. There's a comment, go ahead.
On that, Lynette has suggested that we change that to raise academic achievement instead of just having straight achievement. That goes to the equity and closing the achievement gap. So, just a suggestion.
Mr. Chair, could I just interject? Maybe there's been robust discussion about changing the mission statement, but as you recall, and as Karen will recall, we went through a very intense exercise to develop our core values, mission statement. This is something that brings boards together, and to have it as sort of a, you know, oh, we went through this exercise and we'll do this mission statement, feels rather like we're missing a huge opportunity to build effective boardsmanship. And that has nothing to do with the merits of this actual mission statement, but in short-circuiting that process, I think we will be, as future boards, will be missing an opportunity to build strong relationships, to really say, are these our values? Is this really what we as a board can do? And I would recommend putting that discussion off and having a very good, intensive set of exercises around the strategic plan, the values, and the mission statement.
So the proposed mission statement was actually designed to help us get to that exactly that type of discussion, which is I'm glad you're bringing it up now.
It's backwards though.
It's not, because we actually did talk about all of what this was during the strategic planning session, and when I was reviewing the information that we provided in the strategic planning session, I realized that the mission statement and vision statement that we currently have doesn't reflect what we've said that we want to do. And so I wanted to make sure that we were all on a single page on that. And so that's why I'm putting this here just for discussion. We can certainly put it off to another discussion session or talk about it in addition throughout the process. It's really just a starting point. So
Let's ask a question which is relevant. We're discussing this, we're not voting on this.
correct. There is no voting as working session.
And will we be voting on it in December? We're not until January, or is this a work?
It's really up to the board.
Yeah. The goal is to get it right and to get it done so that we have starting in January. So we could do that so we can vote at the beginning of the January meeting if we don't vote on it in December. Beginning of the January meeting, have a framework for the next 2 years of where we're going to put our capacity and where we might need to ask for additional funds and where we might need to focus our efforts. We've made sure to circulate this to board members elect as well, so that they have input on this, since they'll be living under it.
The other thing to consider as well is there are a number of items that have due dates in January, and so if we don't adopt this, we just need to have that as an understanding that they will likely be ongoing before an adoption of the strategic plan, which is fine. We just need to be aware of that.
I was just information, and I just saw that.
Any other comments, suggestions, talking about the strategic plan?
One thing I will raise, for the group is under administration and budget, our first goal has been, changed or actually added based on the council meeting that we had regarding the omnibus legislation. One of the issues that was raised, by our colleagues and by the chairman was relationships and respect among staff and among board members. So we've added in, and David Grasso asked for an action plan on that, which Camelia is spearheading, which we appreciate. But we also wanted to incorporate that work into our 2-year strategic plan. So goal number 1 would be build credibility and strengthen relationship. Wait a second. Where is that? That's not. Build credibility and strengthen relationships with external stakeholders.
No, it was within that one, because we didn't have another place to put it. So, once the plan is completed, we'll be able to expand and have a new goal on specifically with our internal relationships. But for a placeholder, we have it as action number 2 under goal 1, just so that we have it somewhere in the plan so that we understand that it will be coming as something larger once we know a little bit more about what the plan of action is.
Build understanding and practice of racial and cultural equity among staff and board. That's under goal 1, action number 2. So I just wanted to highlight that. Joanne and Faith have stepped up and are working with Camelia on an initial plan that then will be rolled out to the rest of the board. And at some point, we need to circle back to be responsive to council and get that moving ahead. So I think that's the only quote unquote major change since our discussion at the retreat a few weeks ago. Do any board members have additional questions or thoughts or suggested edits or changes other than Mary, your suggestion on a more robust discussion on the issue?
I don't think we need a long conversation about the mission. I think we've been having it, we'll continue to have it, and we should work things in. But I do have a editing suggestion, which is in that, and I actually like this a lot, but I think it should be, it's a mission of the stakeholder event to promote equity and achievement and good educational practices, because I think that's sort of the third big thing in there. That I think is important.
I think the mission should be all about the ends, right? And that's a means to ends. Like if you're achieving, if students are achieving, there must be good educational practices going on. And also good educational practices are essentially in the eyes of the beholder. Well, it's true. I don't know what the right process is like.
And I don't want to make it a long thing. I want to raise it, we can either come back to it or not come back to it. I just thought part of our work is about quality of education, and sometimes you need to know what that is on your way to the end, and that's sort of relevant to what we do. So with that said, maybe Laura and I will talk about it and we'll see what we do.
Do the other goals and actions, the folks that have responsibility, we check out names and just put the role of the person so that it's fungible. If board members come or go or staff come and go, that the work still continues.
At some point you intend to put names, because I think that was the issue last year.
Yes, as they're named, but we also want to make sure that this was documented that if I'm gone, that, and I'm chairing a committee, that the new chair of that committee would continue that work. And that's another reason that we did not put specific names on it in terms of staff, is this will be a public document that will be on our website, and not everyone looking at the document would know that Paul is our, what role Paul plays. So rather than having
staff,
this
I
being
agree,
had,
I would love to see public accountability for what board members are taking responsibility for.
we can do that.
And I think the public should know.
Sure.
Staff, I feel differently. I would be interested in other people.
I think it's appropriate to put the committee chair name, and that's sort of,
Okay.
I'd rather not go further than now.
But not staff. I would really prefer not to have staff names. Okay.
I don't see the value out of that, but since we're accountable to the public.
Okay. Great. Can you?
Yep. So, is there additional discussion on any of the specific goals or actions or timelines or?
So, this is takes us mainly, when I'm looking at the policy side, it mainly takes us through 2 years, but with two things. I'm wondering, it seems to me it's very full for a year and then it sort of fades. And so when would the time be to talk about what else would go into that? To start thinking more long-term about what we're gonna address next?
Let me jump in for a second, if you don't mind. I think we're gonna have hiccups. Yes, this is a full year of policy work. I think there will be other things that intervene and new policies that OSSI will put forward that we'll have to address, which will stretch out this timeline a little bit. And we have a parking lot that has other things that we can do if we do have time. But the new policy procedures manual also has a section there about retreats. And I'd like to change that instead of 1 retreat a year, 2 retreats per year. I think it currently says that staff will facilitate 1 retreat a year. I think we'd like to change that, but that's for later in our discussion. So I think having that, we can update this if that would work for you.
So there'll be a way of doing that. I just wanna say, we're not signing off on a full 2-year plan here.
It's not
We're
set in
signing off
stone.
on what's here, but we'll have an opportunity
This
to
is
revisit.
what we intend to do. If other things come up, we could adjust. Yeah.
Including things that we come up with.
Yes.
That's fine.
And I think too, one of the other things that this will help us with is when we are coming up with those new ideas of what we want to take action on, having this as a framework will help us figure out from the beginning what the steps are, what the timeline is, who's going to be responsible for it, and what the performance indicators are, so that we can continue that idea of being accountable to not only ourselves, but to the public in a very public way, in a very transparent way of what we're actually going to be trying to accomplish.
This longer term planning will also help with our discussions with council regarding our staffing levels. And
Right, that's
our
what I'm
budget
very
levels.
concerned with, to get sort of real handle on that. well in
Correct, so
advance.
the more we change it long term, the more conversation we'll have to have with council about why we're changing it and how our needs would shift. So the more firm we can get it now, for budgeting for 2018, the better those conversations with council will go. And with deputy results. So,
Well, I think it also helps not only to have the grid, but the work of the federal Every Student Succeeds Act will be ongoing. And so the milestones that you have here are sort of just, they're clear, obvious, but fairly immediate steps that have to be taken. But implementation and being able to correct course will be a major part of the board's, not just ours, but every board's work. And I think having a more precise way of explaining how that work ties into the mission statement and the ultimate goal, which has nothing to do with public education and everything to do with the outcomes for students. That will help strengthen what the work of the board needs to be, and the staffing levels and the engagement sessions and all that other stuff.
Okay. There's nothing further on this I'd like, since OSSI's here, to move on to that. But board members, if you have any, make sure you read through this. If I haven't heard a lot of objections, other than more discussion about the mission statement, which we could take off or postpone. I would really like to be able to vote on this then in December if there aren't any major changes. Right.
I thought you did a great job, JP.
Shauna. Hi.
I apologize for being late.
That is totally fine. We just change our agenda a little bit. Why don't we turn it over to you to talk about ESSA and you and Ruth?
Sure. So I am bringing today a little bit of an update on timeline and what we have learned since the updated regulations came out about a week ago. With broadly proposal to talk about the timeline that we would propose for bringing things, given the new deadlines that came out. So in the new final regulations, the deadlines for the submission on the accountability pieces were moved up 1 month in the springtime to April, and then another one in September. And so what we would propose to do is to maintain the springtime April deadline, and wanted to share a little bit about what we think that would do and the benefits of that here, and talk about what that timeline would look like a little bit for submission. So what we would propose would be to maintain our focus on the April deadline, and then present a draft plan at the State Board working session in February, with testimony at the public meeting in February. Before that, have external engagement essentially the month of February, from the beginning of the first week of February through the first couple days of March. And then have time and have a public comment period that overlapped almost that exact time from the very end of January through March. So concurrent public comment and stakeholder engagement period in which we would hope to be working with each member of the board as well. And then any revisions, and then as we had previously suggested and might request a special session vote in March, so that then we would be able to have it prepared to submit by April. So I think we're really committed to moving forward with urgency to meet the April deadline for a number of reasons. First, just to stay the course with the urgency and the buy-in and the community engagement that we've had, and take advantage of the momentum and engaged partners that we have. And then operate with as much good faith as possible with schools and LEAs who want to know as early as possible how the data and the operations of their schools are going to be used for calculations in a system like this as soon as possible. And so the earlier, preferably before a school year, is always better, and the federal deadline isn't necessarily always aligned with that. But the sooner they know, the more comfortable they feel, the more buy-in they have in moving forward with this. And I think we just also have we feel urgency around getting clarity on policy and for all of our stakeholders. And also just to move forward sooner rather than later with the implementation of policies, to not drag it out longer and longer and longer. And so then for January, what the change in the deadline by moving 1 month buys us, I think, on the front end, I guess, is a little bit more time to prepare a more robust plan that is as clear and precise as possible, and gives us more time to plan for more robust stakeholder engagement and be responsive in terms of the materials and the timeline and what we can book and book on the calendar. And so we're hoping to take that time, gives us just honestly slightly more flexibility with the capacity of our own staff and ability to be responsive around the holidays and flexible, and more time to be, I think, appropriately thoughtful as we're going through it and preparing a full plan, and then also preparing the kind of calendar and stakeholder engagement strategies that we think would be robust for February. So that's the primary update we wanted to share with the board members today, in terms of the operationalizing of the ESSA statewide plan.
Well, Saturday.
The main question I have is, so then if there's gonna be a good, sort of a strong draft presented to us in February, the issue that we've sort of talked about all the way through is for us, it's so much, I mean, you're talking about, oh, there'll be all the rich engagement, it can be planned well for the February, but the more we can sort of get on the same page prior to that, I think it's gonna be, so, are you about to talk about that?
No, I just wanted to say that I did not mean that we would not have anything in front of you until then, but that would be the primary formal presentation.
Okay.
And we would hope to also be presenting things in January to the board as well.
So that's what I wanted to get at, cause originally there was gonna be something in December that we were gonna get,
Mhm.
so is that no longer?
We should, I think, would like another couple days to think about what we could bring in December that would be, that we would be able to present. I think we'd like to be able to present an update, but perhaps push the more formal, robust, presentations into January and the official in February. So it gives us a little bit more time to be flexible and prepare and do some of the data. So we would hope to have conversations and bring drafts and things for feedback in January, and then do the formal presentation in February.
I just think that's it's once again, it's compressing a lot. You're gonna bring us something in January, and we're gonna have sort of our first chance to respond to it, and then you wanna respond to it and then have something else by February. I'm just saying, it would be so helpful to get it earlier. Or even if you can give us, it doesn't even have to be documents, but,
Well, just a question, if I might, have you presented a straw man a month and a half ago? Could just even an updated version of that, would that be helpful at least to show where your
Yeah, well,
thinking is shifting?
exactly, Rita, I said, you presented the straw man, we presented a response, so where are you in that? What are the ways that we can sort of work together to try to figure out where the gaps are and how to come together on them? That's what I'm trying to get at, what are the substantive issues that we need to figure out, sort of problem solve around, I guess.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to think about what we could do for December and for January, or January work session and then January meeting and then formal in February. So and like I said, we have been working and synthesizing and hearing feedback from you as well, so, it may make sense for us to think a little bit and get back to the staff about what parts might be the most helpful to talk about in December versus with, as a committee versus work session in January. Maybe we can do a little bit more thinking about what we bring to each piece of that.
Okay, and I know one thing that would be interesting is I know you guys are doing a lot of local modeling, sort of modeling out how a lot of this stuff plays out. Are you in a position to talk to us about sort of what you're finding, what you're playing out, sort of?
I wanna be able to talk to some of our technical people about what and how, but I do think that we could, add that to the agenda one way or the other in the next 30, 45 days or so. Make sense? I was gonna say briefly that if it makes sense, then I know that we had talked about, the kind of engagement and outreach that might happen in, across the city and in boards, and what, OSSI might be facilitating and also working with your, folks in your wards to do. And so, we've been thinking about a couple of different options there, but would like to reach out, via staff to board members about the types of meetings and dates and locations sooner rather than later that either you have thought about already to put on the calendar, or that we could support for, for February, or if not, if there needs to be some flexibility how we can do that to make sure that we're reaching, groups that you think are important in those wards, and we'll probably do other centralized engagements as well that are open to the public. So if it makes sense, I think we would wanna offer help, support in some of the, operationalizing and, making sure that we're inviting the right folks and working with, representatives from the wards to make sure that, the key topics that are, all topics are covered, but if there's any other key topics that folks think are more important to any particular group, that they're covered. So we'd offer to put together some sort of calendaring tool and or support work about the kind of material that you think would be important and that we would be proposing to present and have facilitation around, and then also working through the schedule and locate those in places that you think would be meaningful.
It was one of the things too that we talked about at the NASB regional stakeholder meeting yesterday on engagement, about having that toolkit for us when we're going to meetings and those types of things. And I also wanted to note that Dr. Woodruff and I have already actually scheduled a meeting in January with SHAPE and the Ward 4 Council to make sure that we're starting that process early. So if we can pair with some of the Ward Council meetings that you know are coming up, or some other PTA meetings that are going on in your wards in January or February, certainly let us know what those dates are so that we can start working about making sure that we have those on the calendar so that we're planning ahead for them. So.
And just to add to that, what I was gonna say when I sort of talked about stuff is, I actually did that with our ward council in, this was early November. Sort of did sort of a talk through, and it was very good, and coming out of that, we now have 4 different schools that are sort of pulling together their LSAPs and PTAs combined to have conversations. So what I wanted to propose to all of us, and I think really in advance of the February, is thinking about going out to schools, whatever the groups are, and starting to talk about this sort of an updated version, much more specific, concrete version of what we did in the spring. And I am very happy to share my notes, to share what I did. I'm happy to come and do it if anybody wants me to do that, or to be there as a resource while you do it, sort of any of the above. And it was very interesting. I mean, it really got to some of these issues that matter to people and how all this stuff plays out.
I think my experience the last time we did a really broad outreach on a policy issue, the decks we were using, do you remember, they were given to us super last minute from Aussie, this precedes your time, Sheena. And they were like 25 wonky slides. And so I just remember on like a Friday night having to stay up until like after midnight fixing the slides because the meeting was Saturday morning. And I just love to not have that happen again. So whether it's something so I'm curious about what you're using, and as we're thinking about the value of public input, are we thinking about at what point? Because if we have some kind of revised draft that you all are working on, I think that's what we want to get the input on, right? And so, or like every time there's a revision, do we go back to the public and get more input, or how are you all thinking about that? And the timeline and the consistency, how are we thinking about the consistency of materials now that we have help from a communications expert in making sure that we're speaking the normal language?
From Aussie's perspective, I value that greatly, having done some of this work on various policy issues in lots of different communities, and really I think most communities are the same in that they're not education policy wonks, no matter what, and I think that's a really strong value to us, and so we appreciate the feedback and also pushback if and when we don't meet that bar. But I think we're gonna be looking at developing our materials specifically to be understandable to the public and to folks who need to understand it.
And then second part too is, we, in FY17, we specifically have budget for translations and those types of things. So if we can work ahead of time, we can work on making sure that we have it available in the languages that we need as well.
Yeah, and I want simultaneous translation at my meetings.
Okay.
I think that, we can work with our language access coordinator to figure out how we can support on both ends. I think that, one of the reasons we did wanna have, from the Aussie perspective, a draft in February and then engagement in February is around that issue. I will say if there are other areas in which it would be helpful to still have conversation, there's a lot of content to cover and a lot of ideas to cover broadly about what this means and how, and so for different groups and for other scheduling issues, it may well be, there needs to be some flexibility in the date, but we did hope to have the engagement around the time of public comment, both for coordination's sake and for transparency's sake, the same reason that you want to be talking to folks about a standard public thing, but we're obviously willing to be flexible if that isn't going to meet the needs of, certain groups or timelines or something like that.
And one part of my response on that would be, I think there's a continuum of different kinds of engagement, and so one is when we have something on paper in February at sort of broader groups. Part of the way I think about it, and I think every board member has to sort of think about who they're working with and how they're going to do it, is how to get out to the school level and we can't do all of that in 1 month. And so to sort of start now, to sort of start getting these conversations going, and then you know who's interested in the school, they know more by the time we come out with a fuller proposal, and also all of us are in a better position. That's sort of how I think about it. So it puts each of us in a better position to sort of talk about what's important when we're here at this table and talking with you. So that's why I think there's a usefulness in doing stuff earlier that's not at all inconsistent or incompatible. In fact, it's usually reinforcing. But that's what, you know, we should talk about that and see. That's how I see it. And then for each of those, I mean, we could sort of have a report template so that we have a way of sort of feeding back to the central what we're hearing.
Just to piggyback on your point, Ruth, there are an awful lot of opportunities, but there are a lot of populations who seem to be less engaged. Traditionally, that's been true, but I think there's more of an imperative now to engage them. Foster kids, English language learners, military kids, homeless populations, but also the business community and the institutes of higher education who are essentially either employing or admitting the end product, our graduates. And that could reframe a whole lot of discussions, because most of the parents I talk to, their goal for their children is not, you know, to pass the PARCC test or to be proficient. It's to go to college, to get a job, to join the military. I mean, they're life goals that are up there. And if we don't engage those populations who are the end users of graduates, I think we will risk being stuck in the same old No Child Left Behind benchmarks of excellence, which may or may not, in fact, be the right measures.
Yeah, I think one of the things too on that point is, you know, the business leaders group that we had an initial meeting of, and then we're going to continue to expand. It actually falls perfectly to have another quarterly meeting of that group at the same time as this. So we'll work with DOES and the WIC and DMGO's office, who helped us put together a business leaders list, along with a lot of help from Mary.
But employers, you know, workforce development and trainers are important, but we also need, you know, the entrepreneurs and business owners.
Right, but what I was talking about was the business leaders that were in the room that actually were hiring the folks, including in making sure that we have folks from the hospitals, and making sure that we have people from Marriott and Tom Penny, and, you know, those kind of folks who really do hire our folks, our graduates. You're right, absolutely.
Go ahead, I'm just offended by one of your comments about Marriott. Because Thomas Penny, who is a personal friend of mine, came and testified. I'm sick of you all dragging him out here and other people of his liking and saying that they're hiring people. They're not doing that. And there's proof of that. They're not hiring our kids. And that's just like when they came out to talk about the GED issue. There was no indication. They've not had recorded one. So we just need to stop saying that. I'm sorry, I'm just offended to keep hearing that foolishness. Continue, but we just gotta be careful about that. And when we bring people in to testify, we need to make sure that their facts are right. We need to talk to real employers who are hiring our young people that graduate from high school, who are graduating from colleges in this region, or who are coming home to work. And we have to dig down to do that. We have to talk to the chamber. You have to talk to the Board of Trade. You have to talk to the National Business League. And then you have to go out to other companies like Fort Meyer Construction that have these entry-level jobs. Okay, not just trot people out here. It's not about you, because I know someone else referred them to you, but we've got to be careful about that.
Do you have, let's work with you to figure that out so that we are inviting the right folks. And any board member who has
And this is not an
suggestions.
attack on Marriott, because I work with them, and I think they do a lot of good work in other areas, but that's not one of them.
Well, let's work. Can you work with Mark and figure out some of those employers that you're talking about, so that we can make sure that they're at the table with us as we have these discussions? Because we wanna make sure, and if other board members have other suggestions of witnesses that we haven't invited, or witnesses that might have a different point of view from ones we've heard from, let's either have them at a roundtable group, that your committee does, or appropriate another panel at one of our meetings, because we wanna make sure we're getting good folks at the table, and all board members need to help make sure that we get those folks there.
I just wanted to add that this can piggyback off of our, reaching and diversifying the voices at the table work. And so, I don't know if it makes sense to try to start up that group again. We said we wanted to wait until after the election and maybe restart it in January, but based on what Ruth just shared, I'm wondering if that's a little too late. Although I guess it's like 2 weeks from now.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
I think at this point, I think board members, and maybe if you don't mind giving a little bit of detail about what the plan is for the members elect that are here, so that they know a little bit about what we're talking about, because I have talked with them a little bit about the committee and what it was designed to do to help us bring, amplify some voices to the table, so I'm gonna give like 2 seconds about what it is.
Sure, well, I think we often talk about public engagement, and it's more or less the same 200 voices that cycle through, and I think it's because we are elected, it is our responsibility to reach in and understand our communities better, and the voices that are not at the table, not just understanding why they're not at the table, but finding different ways to reach them than we've ordinarily used, and so we created a working group, now it's like 6 months ago or something, over the summer, with a number of us here around the table that met and came up with a strategy and a list of actions, and in implementation it fell apart, and I think the board needs to own that it fell apart, and so we decided to take a bit of a break because the election was coming up, and understandably there was a lot of attention that needed to go to other things. And we thought if we had new members when we started there in January with maybe a renewed vigor, especially those who just came off the campaign trail and have all these rich contacts. And one of the other pieces of feedback that had been shared, particularly by Mary, was that the ability to articulate why we're seeking input might engage more people. And so this could be potentially an opportunity if the language around it is accessible. Right, like a lot, even as accessible as I try to be, I think I'm still often inaccessible in the way that I speak, right, about the policy-oriented things. And so like really getting input on how we can make the input we're seeking accessible by people who don't operate in this sort of world of education policy every day. So to the extent that the 3 of you have insight on that too, like looking at the documents and being like, I don't even know what that says, change this to that, and like that kind of feedback is what we need.
Yeah, and to your point at the NASB workshop yesterday on engagement, we did a little worksheet, and one of the opportunities with this outreach with ESSA, we thought the DC table came up with create a regular feedback system to establish trust and relationships with families. So that would go.
I mean,
both
the other
ways.
thing is we were trying to systematize it so
Right.
that these new voices were at the table and accessible in a way, sort of at a neighborhood level, so that people who they trusted were giving them information about things they could influence, which really just requires feet on the ground, like going out and talking with people in places where they congregate and not just relying on email and text.
So one thing I would just throw into that is, I had a very short conversation with Paul about sort of trying to figure out outreach materials. And one thing is whether it's you or me or come to the committee, but really try to brainstorm a bit about some different materials that could connect these two. Because I totally agree, it's the right opportunity and have to take advantage of it. So
It's a great time to have this great one pager about what the board does and circulate it on your phone.
Piggybacking on what Jack said, the thing yesterday, it depends on the neighborhood, community, the educational level, the economic level of your constituents. And we were talking, Marcus and I were talking about redoing the SBOE app, because most of our constituents can use a cell phone, smartphone, but they don't have computers, they don't get emails, blah, blah, blah. So we were talking about trying to do something using that as a line of communication to people across the room. So that, you know, we can communicate with them on a regular basis and bring them into the program.
Might be useful to share what you guys took back from the, you know,
Well,
not now necessarily, but it sounds like a lot of good stuff was covered.
yeah, that's great, yeah.
Internal communications, I think, will also play a big role in it. We are not where we need to be in terms of just bringing feedback from our various constituencies and communities together. You know, I was at this meeting last night, or I was at this conference, and, you know, short summaries where there's sort of a common knowledge base.
So, can I wrap up this discussion, Ruth, or do you want to?
The whole, the essence discussion?
Yeah, like what haven't we got to that you
Let
want?
me just look at my notes, at what I wanted to make sure that we raised. So one thing is I wanted just to put out that I'm sort of steadily starting to get around to each of you guys, and I know Marcus is interested in being on the committee. I know, we're losing one member, and anyway, my view, I think Jack is that anybody who wants to join it, I want you. So think about that. I know Marcus is interested. That was one thing. Also, that we're talking about, I should say, getting people together in this committee has been challenging. And so what I have resorted to is, I call it a serial meeting, like I have the same phone conversation with everybody on my committee, and I'm hoping that will move forward. But among the things that we've talked about is sort of creating, and I think this new timeline makes this more possible, sort of a couple of roundtables where you could bring people together around very specific kinds of issues to really just sort of brainstorm, and it really, it's partly to give us the kind of concrete stuff that we want to then interact with ASEAN. And one is around the quality, the non-testing indicators, what could they be? Another one that came up was on high schools, which is a very challenging issue. And then maybe the business groups, maybe that's one as well. And one thing is I sent in November or October, we sort of adopted kind of a report, sort of a memo on sort of our thinking. I added to it as just sort of a rolling draft, sort of based on the different things that we heard at our last public meeting in particular, but also other conversations and work in the committee. So take a look at it. Everything's highlighted that's new, but it's just a way to keep hearing from people about it, where it's going in a direction that everyone's comfortable with.
And you circulated that this afternoon,
I circulated, I think, a couple of days ago, but I'm not going to take time to go through it substantively, so just do that. I wanted to talk about the LSAT, so let me know if I can help on that. I'll send you out the stuff that we're developing for that. That's it.
So, to get back to the Aussie, oh, and one thing that Ruth mentioned on her committee holding some roundtables, that would just be a sort of a different setup than normal, rather than a formal hearing where it's question and answer. A roundtable would be more of a discussion, and so it'd be a little more free-flowing and maybe a 90-minute conversation.
Right, it might have a particular invitation group. We might try to also make it broader and larger, but it would have sort of a particular focus. That's sort of what I'm thinking. It's in most.
But that's how it would, one of my questions was, what aren't we getting out of the hearings and the panels that you would like to get? And his response was, I want more of a conversation rather than a Q&A.
That's part of it. But I should also say for December is sort of one more chance to hear testimony and stuff that we still want to understand better. And I know one of the issues is the surveys and sort of the state of the research on the climate surveys, how people are doing that, sort of what does it take to put them into place, because I know there's a lot of interest in that. Also, I talked with Tiara about sort of bringing in the work from the Opportunity Gap Committee, which really looked at the very, very high turnover levels in the high poverty schools and how to sort of build that in, sort of use that information, that knowledge as a way to think about the kinds of quality indicators we want. So we may have some people who worked on that coming in December. And if you have other ideas of specific questions that we want to get addressed in this testimony, let me know, let John Paul know, and we'll have that in December.
Thank you, Ruth. And then the last thing is, we just really appreciate an updated, straw man from Aussie. I think that would be helpful to think about what would make sense in terms of presentation or whatnot at our December meeting. So that's,
Sounds great.
when we figure that out, probably by the end of this week, if not by Monday at the latest. So that we can get materials together and get out all that squared away.
Could you also update the timeline document that was sent originally so that we can be all on the same page so we know what we're working from, based on the conversation that we had?
Based on the conversation today, I'll send you the updated and get back in touch about December.
It would be great if that included the turnaround and documents that we'll use for the public meetings.
About the timeline for them?
Yeah, like that we can expect them, January 20th or whatever.
And also, I just wanna say Shauna has been good enough to get together with me a couple of times just to start to try to get a conversation flowing across the two agencies, so appreciate it. Hard.
Absolutely.
Any other
I
discussion?
want to also let her know, on the business side, first I want to commend you all because you guys exceeded your goal by 6 times, your SBA goal spending goal for the city. And you all have one of the most robust lists of primes and subcontractors that are employing many of our people in this city. I would suggest that you speak with your operations person. They could probably identify a half a dozen employers that you all contracted that you guys can probably deliver. I will do some, but you guys are already doing a good job as well as any agency in this city.
Thank you, and that's a great
Tell the
idea that
director,
I hadn't thought of.
appreciate that.
We will, thank you, and I will absolutely, work with our own internal operations folks to identify the people that we already work with. That's a great place to start. Thank you.
MPD. Yeah. Great. If nothing else, we'll move on from ESSA and turn it back over to John Paul to talk about or Karen bylaws.
Should we just start talking? So I wanted to start out by thanking Joanne and Faith for talking with me through some of the provisions in these bylaws. There are, as we have discussed a number of times, the bylaws that we are currently in place have not been updated since 2014, and so don't even include, thank you, the Ombudsman's office or the student advocate's office, which is just unacceptable. So we need to update the bylaws. These have, we've talked about them internally. There are, I'm sure, a number of points that we can continue to talk about and refine in terms of language and those types of things. Once we have the general concepts down, I will run these through OAG to make sure that everything, all the legal T's and I's are dotted and crossed. And then we'll either adopt them in December or January, depending on the board's decision. Are there any specific parts? I wanted to talk about a couple sort of major changes in the structure. Article 3 is brand new and refers to all of the offices.
I just want to ask them, I'm sorry, I'm hoping I'm reflecting other people's issues as well. Can you tell us where we are in the process on this, like where this is a draft we're looking, and then how it's going to play out?
Sure. So this is the sort of final staff draft, I guess, is how I would refer to it. And this is sort of as far as we can take it without input from the board. Any comments, questions, concerns, more information needed by the board, we'll take back, look at, see what information we can do, what revisions we can make. If they're small in nature, we potentially could then vote in December to adopt them with a January timeline or by signature or whatever. Or if they're larger and we need to think about them more, then we could potentially then do the same, another discussion in January with an adoption in January. It really depends on what type of questions that we have and what the structure is when we have that discussion.
I'd say it's all staff plus though. Mark and Karen and I had a good discussion at the NASB board meeting where we went through some of this maybe not everything got captured, I think it did, but, I think most governance committee was with it.
So then, after this part of discussion, then it's the fine tooth comb look.
Where you go to OAG.
So we'll go to OAG and then bring it back to the board for a final look before voting.
So this is the meeting where anything that we have that's substantive, you want us to verbally raise it now, or you want us to raise it in writing subsequently? Okay.
Verbally, or if you wanna send it to me later.
Both even.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I think there needs to be some distinction made between administrative staff, which I'm putting the executive director in that capacity, and the ombudsman and the student advocate, because they're not administrative staff. I don't think they should be, kind of under managerial control by the executive director of the office. I think that they should be reporting more directly to the board. It seems to be, and I see there's no distinction made, as I was reading through this. I didn't see any distinction made between them and the other staff. They seem to be kind of grouped, if I read this correctly, it seems that they're all being grouped as staff. And I think, especially for an ombudsman, I think that really kind of usurps the whole point of having an ombudsman, because an ombudsman should have a certain amount of autonomy, it should have a certain amount of authority that being under a direct managerial control usurps. And so I think either the language has to be adjusted, or maybe that's the recognition or the desire of the board, but I have a problem with that.
Which section are you looking at?
Section 3,
Section.
where it says the state, or agencies of the state board.
Okay.
And throughout the document, I saw where references were made to staff, and I'm assuming, if I'm reading, if they're seen as staff of the if they're in the offices of the state board, that would kind of put the ombudsman and the student advocate as staff, kind of reporting to kind of managerial control by the executive director.
What's up, Joanna? Weigh in for a sec.
So I have a couple of comments, and I appreciate your comments, Camille. I think we tried to tease that out in Article 3. I think the challenge here is that this is not redlined, so it's not clear what's different about it from what you guys probably saw in 2014. So I think that would probably help us even see all this. We've made a lot of changes, Faith, John Paul and I. So.
We didn't have anything about the ombudsman or the student advocate back then.
Right, but
So
there were other
these whole
changes.
blocks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are other changes made as well, so I think it's hard to, let board members decide, but to kind of figure out what's what.
To piggyback on Camille's point, however, bylaws of our organization apply to our organization, our members, our staff, our operating procedures. Some of it, much of it in fact, comes right out of the enabling legislation that put DCPS in narrow control. There is nothing permanent about the ombudsman being in our office. So it's almost like we can't really write them into our bylaws because they are not us. They are not in the enabling legislation, so, and it's very possible that at some future turn of the screw, the council in its wisdom decides we need to call it something else, or it gets subsumed by, that there's a master organization and it's an ombudsman for everybody, and there's an office of ombudsmen for everything you ever name. So putting it in bylaws is setting it in stone. Bylaws should change infrequently and for good reason, and this seems to me establishing potentially something that adds to even more complication rather than fewer.
So we tried to make this reflect the omnibus legislation that's before council right now, and the pieces related to the ombudsman and the student advocate specifically refer to the legislation, which is even more set in stone than our bylaws, because legislation will supersede bylaws any time. So if we want, to Camille's original point, to add in additional language clarifying independence, whatnot, we can certainly do that. But the board does have some requirements with regard to hiring the ombudsman and the student advocate and overseeing them that should probably be codified even though it's already in legislation, it doesn't hurt to remind us, since this is our playbook on a regular basis. And DC code, I don't look at a whole lot, but I do look at our bylaws. Having it here makes it easy, but I'm happy taking it all out.
It shouldn't have its own section. I think.
If that's a suggestion that you're making,
I mean,
then you can just suggest they have their own section.
Okay, I mean, it seems to me that part of the issue that Camilla raised is offices within the agency of the state board. And that's a construct, but you could also, I think, as NASB does with its auxiliary organizations, there was a separate little section that addresses the, those two affiliate organizations, and that they are voting members on the board of directors. So that would seem to address Camille's concern and also provide a place in the bylaws for both offices.
What y'all want to do?
I don't have an issue with it being in the bylaws. We have had, we took, 90 minutes to talk through it. So I mean, I feel like it reads the way that I'm comfortable with.
You guys feel, because it does say to me, Camilla, it does, I'm just looking, it says very clearly, the chief student advocate shall have exclusive authority over the personnel and budget of the office of the student advocate, and I think it's comparable language.
But it does say that they have purview over their personnel within their specific offices, but then it basically lumps them as staff under.
Where?
In Article 1. Well, Article 1 says staff shall be hired within accordance with DC official code, blah, blah, blah. But then Article 2, it says the executive director, all staff within the office of the state board shall report to the executive director. So.
I think that area, and we did work to make that more explicit under the definitions, and I know we had gone back and forth on whether definitional terms need to be even sooner or where exactly they should be. But the office of the state board, that would be the administrative staff that works directly for the board. So maybe it's the positioning of the definitions of our offices or roles, because I think it's confusing. It's the office of the state board, and then it's the agency of the state board. And I am not a bylaws expert. I don't know if, so this could be a really ridiculous suggestion, but perhaps also our organizational structure, if that's something that is included here, could also help people understand what the relationship is. And so maybe, we had talked, I had raised in our very robust conversation, the definitional terms. So maybe moving them, maybe changing that position to help describe that, because I think the confusion between office of the state board, office of the ombudsman, office of the student advocate, then it's the agency of the state board, can get really confusing in the terminology as we go, but maybe looking at what the reporting structure actually would be, so that it would capture that we report to the board in our roles. I don't know if that is also.
If I'm looking, it says that all staff should report to the executive director. If all staff are the staff of the office of the state board, and the office of the state board includes the state board administrative staff, the executive director, the ombudsman, and her personnel, and the state student advocate and her personnel, I would think all that would be staff. To me, that's kind of a general.
All of those are staff of the agency of the state board, not of the state board. I think it's a definition issue or a language issue, but I think the intent is the office of the state board is the staff under John Paul.
Well, it's defined here. Offices and office.
Right, the ombudsman would be Joanna's staff and Anna. The agency is everybody.
The office of the state board, the office of the ombudsman, and the office of the student advocate. Staff within the 3 offices.
Yeah.
So all those persons are doing, from my reading, those all would be staff. And then further says that all staff should report the executive director. Some staff, I think, should report the executive director. That would be the administrative staff and the administrative staff of the state board.
Right.
But the staff, the
Yes.
ombudsman and the student advocate, I don't think should be lumped in this. So maybe it should say that all administrative staff within the office of the state board shall report to the executive director.
I think
just
we all
saying
want the
word
same
is
outcome.
sticker
I think we
there.
want the same outcome, so if you have some language you'd like to suggest and that Joanna and Faith can sign off on, let's just get that, so that was incredibly clear. We're trying to make more clarity, not less, all the way around. And so, if you could do that, we will incorporate those changes.
Okay. My suggestion would be that all administrative staff, that sentence should be all to say, all administrative staff within the office of the state board shall report to the executive director. And that to me would be just explicit. And that's simple.
Great. You said there were a couple of other points that you wanted to raise, new sections or?
Yeah, one of the things that I brought up in the email that I sent out, is actually in, sorry, let me find the correct page. Has to do with meeting materials and when we get them. As I'm looking, the current bylaws say that we should have our meeting materials here. It is page 7, number 4.12. Our current bylaw says that we should have our meeting materials at least 7 days ahead of time. That never happens. So should we maintain that and or enforce it or don't? Or should we change it to what our current practice is, which is by noon on the Friday before meeting?
Just an historical reference,
Thank you.
that was, when that was added into the older bylaw, that was to try to bring it back to how it used to be. Because we used to get the materials a week or so in advance, even to the point where we were able to courier them to the board members' home and also email them so they had a paper and electronic copy before meetings and working sessions. So that addition to that bylaw was so that we weren't running around at the 11th hour trying to prepare for meetings and working sessions and getting last minute testimonies, materials, PowerPoints, whatever. So when we added that to the older bylaws, that was trying to get back to being able to more proactively provide you guys with materials and information.
That was also, if I remember, a symptom of two superintendents who didn't provide us information until sometimes mere hours before. But this posse has been much more cooperative. They don't get us everything as soon as we'd like it, but they do a pretty good job at getting us by that Friday noon deadline.
And our bylaws don't govern other agencies.
True, but that we could, if a witness has not complied with our bylaws, we could object to them testifying. If they don't, if OSSI, for instance, has not provided us the materials by the date and required in our bylaws, a board member could object and require an override of the bylaws before that witness would be able to testify.
So is this meant to include public witnesses?
No, this 412 is just meeting materials, and so in general, we give meeting materials from internal staff presentation and then from OSSI. It is not designed to do, to talk about public testimony, and I don't believe I changed that in here, but that's a good point, and I can make that more clear.
I think that'd be great.
I also wanted to just bring up in the participation clause in general. So the interested parties recognize.
He's at 4.5.
Sorry, yeah, 4.5, and then section 4 within that. So interested parties recognized by the president. I thought that was a little bit ambiguous. Just going back to my last meeting, what I saw or what I didn't see were a lot of students testifying. So it'd be nice if that was explicitly stated that students are always welcome to come to the meetings and testify, but I'm not sure whether that would mess with what you already have. So I don't know, just general thought.
And I think I think student participation should be encouraged, and I would be fine adding a line in that specifies that. And if you wanted to provide language to John Paul, I think that would be, I think that would be favorably viewed by board members.
One clarifying question, are you talking just of public meetings, or do you mean working sessions as well?
I meant public meeting, okay.
I like the idea, but I think it shouldn't just be students, because I think then we're really privileging one set of, and I think it's a good idea to name them, but I think it shouldn't just be students.
Can you work with him and John Paul?
Well, but I don't know, then you get into this meeting
Yeah,
list and you exclude like student the churches. I actually think it's appropriate for us to put out students being an education board.
What about
parents?
parents? What about teachers? I mean,
I think at the end, it's students who are most affected by the issues made, or the decisions made by the board. That said, if we just start explicitly stating what parties are allowed to be involved in these meetings, we sort of have to get on a roll, just naming every party, that just takes away the time that
so
we
you
spend
can
on
do
it.
including some key ones.
Well, that's language.
I mean, advocates, I mean, I don't know, I'm happy with it.
I have a couple of thoughts. So on page 9, section 524, under committees. I'm sorry, let's start with section 5.1, so that's page 8. You have this standing committee. This committee shall consist of the vice president who will serve as chair, et cetera, et cetera. You guys with me? I think we should add unless otherwise delegated by the vice president, just because you might have a different leadership combination where that's not actually what we want. Maybe the president loves that stuff and wants to do it. Or maybe there's someone else that is like a CFO or something, you know?
So the vice president, or is there?
Unless otherwise, unless otherwise delegated by the president. I don't know if you wanna do that or by the vice president, or you could say where it is or it doesn't mean. That gives vice president authority that in other sections you give to the president. I am,
Sounds fine.
I don't really care, but.
Okay.
And then moving to 524, open meetings.
Yep.
So I don't remember this language before, so it might be the same or it might be new, but here you're saying this is an ad hoc committee, so it's an official committee of the state board, is how I'm interpreting this. And therefore, because it's an official committee of the state board, it must have, it must be part of the Open Meetings Act, whereas I think we're self-imposing that, only if it's an official meeting with a quorum of state board members, right? Which you have to comply with the Open Meetings Act.
The way that.
I was just thinking about like the working group that we had, where sometimes five people were there, like,
And we had to make them, we had to declare it over.
and I don't think, like, I just don't see the value add in that particular thing.
So, according to Office of Open Meetings, if there are 5 members on a committee, that is automatically part of the Open Meetings Act.
Yes.
So this is part of, this was actually in our original bylaws, and I separated them out for the standing committee and for the ad hoc committees, which was already part of the bylaws. So this is not a change, but this is something that we.
So
Or
I
we
would
could
rather
even-
see it say, these meetings
Where
need to
required.
comply with the Open Meetings Act, rather than
Requirement.
imposing additional element on
And
us.
just to clarify that, because I had the same thing, so in effect, once you put in that language, the end result is a meeting that has 4 or more board members, 5 or more board members has to be noticed and everything else, but a working group or a committee that only has 4 members does not, correct?
Correct.
And then
Elected members.
Ad-
Elected members, correct.
in 5.25, you say a chairperson of an ad hoc committee has to have served at least 1 full calendar year. I don't agree with that. I don't know why we would have that. Was that in the past? Because that would have disqualified me from running the task force.
It wasn't in the original bylaws. It was something that Karen and I discussed a lot. And that we discussed with, I guess, some of the new board members, but not everyone at this table, is that we felt it was more appropriate for board members to have experience and understand how the board works and how the committee works and how staff works before they were empowered with the chairmanship. But we can certainly take that out.
Well, because in Ruth too, she ran that committee and she was new too, so I feel like.
It's a judgment call.
Yeah.
We can
I don't like it.
unless otherwise delegated.
I don't like it. I think, new members should be able to serve.
it's such a damper on new members, just willing to be involved.
You can always put in a caveat unless otherwise delegated by the president.
So they'll be delegated anyway.
Like,
Strike it.
yeah, I mean,
It feels like folks wanna strike it,
in most cases, yeah.
you know, don't. Strike it.
And then 6.2, record of meetings, could we just specify which meetings have to be recorded? So, for example, do ad hoc committee meetings need to be recorded? And do we have the resources for that to occur? You know, like transcribed officially, or are we just talking about the 2 meetings a month?
I'll work on some language for that.
I'm just keep going, that's okay.
Yeah.
7.3, official statements. So you say violations of this section may be cause for termination or censure. So I don't think another board member can terminate another board member.
I had the same
Why
question.
would we knock Jack out?
Oh, yeah. No, I had that same question. I said, how does it terminate? And John Paul will answer.
So termination is for the staff part of the person, members and staff.
Let's just add for staff or censure
Yeah, I mean,
members.
what we could do is also just,
So they should
Well, what are we trying to get at?
sections, I mean, they're just
you could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just try to not make it.
I don't know if we're included in that. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend looking at some bylaws of other similar organizations, because bylaws governing staff actions and bylaws governing members of boards of directors
Well,
are
and
different.
all the staff are now at will. If they violate something, that would be a personnel decision. I don't think it needs to be covered by the bylaws.
And that's also very convoluted, you know, it's like members and staff, and we've got everybody else, and excluding them, it's, and who's gonna decide whether it's appropriate or not, you know, you start getting into this.
I think the board together, like, if someone's off the ranch, we're gonna know they're off the ranch. Dixon, South Dakota.
Yeah, and you've already got,
But there should be, if you are off the ranch, there should be some sort of consequence to that.
well, yeah, don't we already have it?
Consequences, everybody's gonna be doing that.
I like the censure thing, I think it's fine.
Yeah,
But
but
I
people
think
want
we
to,
need to-
people wanna do it, I mean, I think.
So on the next page, there's some more specificity about it, so page 12, under 7.9, you talk about censure, but you don't say what is required for censure. So I think I don't know if it's majority vote, 2/3 vote, but I think there should be something in there.
I'll
And
break it
then
down.
just above that, the quorum, so, okay, totally push back if this is just my shtick, but it drives me bonkers that we spend 5 minutes every meeting taking attendance. Mr. Jones, Ms. Williams, like, it's so arcane, then you just look across and you can see who's there, you can just say, and by looking around, there's a quorum, or there isn't. Can't we use this as an opportunity to just not do that anymore?
It's not an important part of the record keeping though.
No, you can just look around, you can even just say,
A quorum is here.
a quorum is present and these 3 members are absent.
Okay.
I don't know, but I don't wanna break, like, the formality.
You don't wanna
people are
break
attached
Robert's
to that.
rules of order.
But it always feels so arcane and like a bit comical.
I think it's right out of Robert's Rules of Order.
I think it's a part of Robert's rules.
11th edition.
I'm just putting it out there.
You want everything else.
Maybe
You
I
want
enjoy
everything
that.
else.
I
This is the one time I get to talk.
Well, I just noticed the thing about not needing to read things into the record, JP, so that's it. Cutting you off on that too.
It is, I mean, Robert Warner, we do the same, as following the Robert
Yeah.
I think it is part of Robert's rules, and you decide to
Just put
We
exact.
can supersede them with the bylaw.
Yeah.
Right.
Robert's rules except when specified.
Yeah.
Well, every time you say it, all I can think of is Scottish Tuesday. Mr. Whedon, Mr. Whedon.
Maybe it's the delivery.
Yeah, maybe you should
I'll work on my
say it
term.
like, Mr. Whedon? And then just finally, Article 9, on page 13, I wondered if you call out the state board should do their own PD, you call out the staff should like find their own PD, you know, that should act, in my personal opinion, should be like a management discussion, and I'm not sure that has to be in the bylaws at all, but I don't see any specific mention of the ombudsman and the chief student advocate, and to Camille's earlier point, where are you putting them in, or do you feel like you should be there?
So I think that professional development is incredibly important. We stress that whenever Austin's talking about what teacher training is available for their professional development. I think we should make it a priority too.
I'm not saying don't put it in there, I'm
Okay.
saying if we're gonna call out the state board, then we should probably call out ombudsman and chief student advocate also. And I think the staff portion belongs in the staff manual, not in our bylaws, but that's just, again, my personal take. Like, it's also not, yeah, you can encourage it for the staff, but it's really a co-partnership in an ideal world between the manager and the managee when you're pursuing professional development experiences, and that doesn't feel like it belongs in a bylaw, but that's just my personal take.
Okay, let's move the staff professional development to the manual, and then Joanne and Faith, if you'd like, to be included in professional development section here, we can do that, but we're not gonna do anything you guys think. Don't approve on. Think about it and you get back to Joan Paul.
Just, going back, 5.2.6 on page 10, the, non-member appointments and the ad hoc committees. There seems to be a rather elaborate, process for non-members appointed to an ad hoc committee. Some of the most beneficial, and
It's on page
the non-member appointments, some of the most beneficial, task forces that OSSI put together early on that did things like teacher, licensing changes, involved lots of non-OSSI, non-state board members, and to have this sort of approval, I think you want to preserve the ability to have outside members and not have it seem like you have to jump through hoops to get 50 chops of approval. So I would either, just say somewhere in the ad hoc committee section earlier on that the ad hoc committee can be whatever it is. There is nothing right now that says you can't have outside members, and there are probably going to be times when we will want those outside voices present at the table.
Why don't we just let that prevents us from having it?
Yeah, so I would actually just.
Are you saying that the process here would discourage
I would say.
non-member participation?
Appointments of non-members to an ad hoc shall be made by the president with the approval of the majority of the members of the state board. These appointments made in consultation with the committee chairs, blah, 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 blah. We have the ability in our bylaws to have ad hoc committees, and that was an addition when we initially when we had right bylaws in the first place from the legislation. There's nothing that says, there's nothing that dictates who can serve on those ad hoc committees. It merely preserves the board's ability to form them. And you don't necessarily need bylaws to spell out, oh, by the way, you can have,
I don't think you do, because I don't.
It also gives an extraordinary amount of, it adds bureaucratic kind of things. Presumably, if the board decides it needs an ad hoc committee, there will be board and president and vice president by it, right? You can't just form an ad hoc committee.
So are you just suggesting that you have a piece that says membership and says board members and or DC residents may be members of any ad hoc committee?
I think you just take it out. You just say, we can have ad hoc committees, and the board can decide who, how many, how it will feed, how that ad hoc committee's work will feed into the work of the board. But you don't wanna put all sorts of structures in place that imply that ad hoc committees must pass some sort of different test. This is just me speaking, but say we wanted to tackle, student mobility, which affects some schools much more than others. we're not experts on student mobility, we don't have the, authority or the policy authority to tell the students where to go to school, but we do have a value of choice, we do have a value of excellence, we do have a value of equity, so it fits the board's work. But you wouldn't wanna have the president and the majority of the board sit and vote on who the members are, you could have that as an informal discussion.
So you're suggesting that we just streamline membership of committees?
I just think you take out that whole 526.
Well, I think what this does is it allows non-board members to serve on committees.
There's nothing that says they can't.
There's nothing that says they can't.
I mean, you could just put something, it doesn't
If
matter
this is-
either way, but
if-
in 5.2, you could just put something that indicated that.
Correct, so let's just make it a simpler version of who can serve on the committee,
It
board
says-
members or committee members.
It just says it all, the ad hoc committee, you have the.
I don't see where you're
Can we-
saying that, what are you
can
trying to do, which
you
line?
get
So 5.2 on
language?
page 9,
Can you get language to everybody so that we can just look at it as we? do
Yeah,
it?
I mean, I would just say,
I
the
think we
bylaws
all agree,
currently
yeah.
give the board the ability to appoint
Yep.
committees and ad hoc committees. How you do those, who serves on them, the composition, you don't need to spell that out. You can put anyone on an ad hoc committee or a committee for that matter. But if you then go to this, the chair, the open meetings, it sort of comes down to, we're gonna make it really hard. I think it's unnecessary. Best bylaws are those that give you the possibilities, don't necessarily specify exactly how you have to carry it out, unless that's crucial to the effectiveness and implementation of the
Non-members'
committees.
appointments should be made in consultation with the committee. Because I think the committee chair should have.
I'll put it in an email, but it just seems like it's, starting to get really down the weeds and really specific, and you don't need it.
Yeah, my thought just generally is, I want non-board members to be able to serve our committees, and I just want some language in there, some language in there that says that non-members can serve our committees.
Right, but there's no language
But
right
we
now.
know we agree, so they're gonna figure out a way to get it in, or you're gonna send something. We all agree.
But you don't need it.
I'd like it. Next.
So to change the topic a little, I'd like some clarification. I would like some clarification on the, whether there are other laws governing the ethical standards of board members, because to be quite honest, this reads like a list of suggestions right now, and this thing does talk about the District of Columbia, 7.1, sorry about that. It talks about the District of Columbia Ethics Act, and I've never read that, and I'm not sure if it goes into more detail there, but like avoid financial conflicts of interest, what does that mean? What is a conflict of interest?
Getting a check from DC.
Yeah, I know.
I love that idea, to strike the list, unless it says comprehensive, it's.
Yeah.
So there is in chapter 18 of the personnel manual, which covers the employee code of conduct, there is a longer list, and it's actually the exact same list that's in the policy manual. So I can just refer to that. Yeah, we can refer
There's
to that.
only one place in
Yep.
Great point. Can I ask one question about that? Because I thought it was on avoid outside payment for government work. Does that mean that anybody on the board can't get any check from any DC government agency for anything else? Is that part of the conflict of interest? Have I learned something new every day?
Board of that, but these are bylaws, so this employee, this part would be just for the board, right? Other questions?
Or your staff?
Yeah, I would remove that. Elections, I think is one of those weird.
You have government employees that actually have nonprofits and businesses that do business with government. They receive government checks. I don't think that's accurate, but.
We'll check that too, but I can make sure that they get a chance to look at these things too.
under election of the state board president, we have it in section 2.2.2. That the annual election of the president of the state board should be the first order of business on the agenda at the first public meeting of January in each calendar year. I remember having to do this in my first January, and it was very difficult. We were new, we didn't know anybody, we didn't know what we were doing, and I really think, I was thinking about the new people, I think it's the wrong time to have an election, and I would highly recommend doing it, sort of, thinking sort of semester-wise, maybe doing it in May, maybe doing it in June, so that we just shift it, and I would scrap that now.
I think that's also the enabling legislation. It's in the law.
It's always been, the 9 years I've been here, even on the phone.
It's actually statutory.
And that's, we can't switch that?
Right, no, I'm saying, even when I was at the old board, that
Well, I mean, we could,
We have to.
we'd have to do it through legislation first.
And we missed our moment, right?
Can you make a motion at a meeting to postpone?
Not according to statute, there's no way to postpone.
Because if there's no, I believe it was if there was no board leadership, then the board couldn't take any action, so there's no votes, no anything.
No, we'd maintain the person, we'd maintain the officers until.
I don't want it anymore.
Or maybe not for choice.
Don't be in here. I can ask our chief, there's some.
Well, I don't know, I mean,
But I don't think
if
so.
others, if others have a similar idea and it's a similar sense, then I think it's worth checking into. I found it a problem, so.
But we have no context for making the vote.
Yeah, and I thought it's just a wrong way, it asks you to act ignorantly in a very important initial vote. I think it sets the wrong,
And look what happened.
the wrong,
Yeah.
and look what happened. So I do think we should look and see if if others are sympathetic, that we should look at that.
I have a question with that. With that though, what if for say, someone new, or if someone
was
had
it-
beat
did he
Jack,
elect
and,
him?
yeah.
Well, no, so he's gonna have,
I think there's
Oh.
the enacted legislation, then it would default to the vice president or the most senior member of
Yeah.
the body.
Okay, in this case, we would have neither. I mean, it's supposed to be both.
Right, then it's senior
Then
member.
it would go to That's true, because you get reflections.
that if the person lost the election.
Yeah, you would have no head.
Yeah.
Well, it would
That
go to-
actually makes a ton of sense.
Well, it would go to
Yeah.
But again, I mean, in this
Which
case.
I still would favor, personally, I
I'm
still
just saying,
think.
because we're on the same cycle, we are divided into the cycles, so, maybe we wanna look at having one.
And the terms don't end until the end of the calendar year. So that's
The
not.
swearing in starts in the term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe just not divided.
Well, it's a point for just continued discussion, I think. Yeah, and I encourage you to talk to your colleagues about it, yeah.
But even if you can't capture it here, could you still have some document about the way that you want board people have been elected? And engaging them in a way so that you kind of, you're not just showing up
But there is
on
a
January
bylaw
1st and
where
you're
you
like,
have-
here's everything. I mean, you have newly elected members who are here now, so finding other ways to, and I don't know if that's in the we looked at the policy manual, but that's even more voluminous. And we did talk about it in a much more brief time, but I don't know if there's maybe a way to talk about the way that you, kind of, the onboarding process of new members, so that they could have some type of orientation, so that you do understand, and you're not being oriented at that meeting.
Well, that's important too.
Because I think even if it was in February, if you're just being oriented at that time, you might still feel at a deficit.
All right, 2.2.13, this is, I don't think it actually needs to go in here, but I wanna raise it, maybe it should go in here, which is, so the president is appointing members to represent the board in other places, and somewhere else, it talks about, number one, the president, talks about meeting with the state superintendent, the chancellor, and a lot of other people. And I would just like to make it more formalized, that there's a feedback loop on that, so that and I know sometimes you have, but to get formal report backs on the cross-sector task force, to get formal reports back to you on your monthly meetings, I think it would really, really help us all be, well-informed about all the different issues that are going on. So, like I say, I don't know that it needs to be in here, but, if that makes it easier, let's put it in here. If not, let's just do it, it's just sort of a.
Is that something you'd be okay putting into the manual?
Yeah, I'd be fine putting it in the manual.
Could you figure out a way to incorporate that into the manual, because I think that
maybe it should be, actually, you know where it could go is on the, where you list the agenda. Is you could list, you could list reports from meetings that have been held.
It's a part of the president's report.
Yeah, actually, that would be fine.
Just-
Or of people who are specifically appointed to other committees to represent the board, it would go right there.
I think, let's stay on this for just a second, Bruce, if you don't mind, because I think that is important, and I think actually a written report is probably more appropriate, because some of the things that are discussed with the deputy mayor or the or the superintendent aren't really things that you wanna talk about at a public meeting, but that are important for all board members to know. What's coming down the pipe in terms of, I don't know, let's think about that.
Let's think about it. I mean, I think
memorialize
that,
it too.
yeah, and I think maybe having a written report, that's a good part, but part of what I wanna make sure we have is an ability to sort of feedback, so if there's conversations that are going on, that we have relevant information before there's an opportunity. And same with the cross-sector task force, I mean, that's huge, it's gonna affect the education of the whole city, and people raise it all the time when we're at board meetings in the schools, and it'd be nice to figure out a way to have better interaction on it. Okay.
And I think the corollary to that is because the president or the vice president are speaking to the board, it's important for the board to know well in advance what's going to be said so that there can be input.
But I'm not talking about when he speaks at the council meetings, because that actually does get handled very formally and very appropriately, I think. I'm talking about the regular meetings that you have.
Yeah,
You know,
it's the two-way flow of information. And similarly, board members, we should, again, have that kind of reporting mechanism.
All right. 4.1, so you list the board meetings, and you don't have committee meetings, I'm just raising, is that an ad hoc committee meetings, is that, need to be there, or, I don't care, it just struck me that,
It isn't in our current bylaw structured that way, so that I didn't put it in, but I can add
so
committee
it's just
meetings.
like a separate it has its own number, is that the point?
So these are for our official meetings, so ones with quorum. So that's why I think committee meetings are not listed here because.
Well, sometimes roundtables wouldn't have quorums.
But that is still an official meeting of the board rather than a subset of the board. Again, I'm fine listing them and I don't think it matters.
All right, and let me
either
just
way.
say it again, I don't know that this is important or not important, I'm not trying to make it important if it's not, but actually when Jack and I talked about the roundtable for the ESSA committee, we actually talked about it as being a roundtable of the committee, which actually eased the burden on the whole board, so I guess that just means there is such a thing, this kind of formal roundtable.
Ask Tamika for historical knowledge.
Yes.
Well, just to kind of take a step back, just, previously when there was mention of quorums, and a lot of the direction that I'm referencing also came from NASB, that also meetings, emails can count as quorums if there's more than 5 board members on it. If, like, once upon a time, board members used to meet at the old Ebbett Grill, and that was unofficially a meeting if there were 5 or more there. So, although we're kind of picking apart just a few of these things, there are other things that, board members may participate in that can be viewed as a meeting. Like if I'm, didn't work with you guys as a member of the public and happen to walk by and see 6 board members sitting down, it would appear as a meeting. So there are some other.
I think that's only for
I don't drink, so I
board
don't
business.
know.
Because we're still allowed to do social interactions. I think that's only for discussing board business.
But in some instances, it has come up. And then to kind of segue into ethics conversation trainings that I've had, like theoretically, outside of the board, if I were to be out with any of you all, I met you in my capacity of an employee, so it's still that gray area, because had it not been for employment of DC government or the Board of Education, I would not know you. So whether we're talking about the sunset, the Capitol construction, or how the election went, our connection is still the board. So that social can still be a slippery slope.
Great area. Thanks.
Well, I guess it's fine.
So on meetings, you'd just like to add a board, one that just says meetings?
If it's not needed there, it's not needed there. I mean, if it's handled by the other place, by the fact that committee meetings is separate, that's fine. I think that. So, okay, 4.7, sorry, I read these, but, the board by a majority vote shall approve the participation of members by telephone or other approved electronic device. I mean, this just struck me as very mischievous. What if somebody wants to call in for a vote and the rest of us don't want them to vote, and so we don't let them? I don't think that's right. I think if you call in for a vote, you get to vote.
So this particular provision is part of, the methodology is part of the Open Meetings Act. So I guess through bylaw, we could say that we're not gonna allow participation through telephone or other electronic means, but.
It encourages participation.
Right, it's designed to encourage participation, especially by elected officials.
Maybe it's the wordings. In other words, the board can vote to have the vote by telephone.
I see. Okay, it's not saying that it's not saying, I just wanna make sure that we're not saying that somebody can't vote.
No.
But the wording is, no, but you're right, the wording is very ambitious.
Yeah, this wording hasn't changed from our current bylaws, I just split it so it was actually easier to read. So I'm fine with changing whatever language.
I mean, I think that's a problem, so I would just fix it to that.
Do you wanna send me some language or?
You could simply say something like, the board, shall approve, votes by telephone or other approved electronic means. According, so you could, basically, it's a vote to approve a telephone vote, an email vote.
I mean, I just say something, a board member may participate electronically to, meet the standards of the Open Meetings Act, that will be approved prior to the meeting by the board or something like that, just so that it establishes.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, we never took a vote to let somebody
Yeah, we do.
join by
Yeah, we
phone.
do.
Did we?
Yes, every time.
Is that vote by phone?
Yes, like,
Like when you
Camilla
hear
call
me
and
say
we'll
something,
take a vote,
we'll have
whether
our
it's
phone
accepted or
on
not.
the phone.
So we approved
Her call, or whoever.
her
call.
participation to vote by phone.
Right.
Just did that last month. Yeah.
I mean, I think we all agree on the point, if you can solve it, then it's fine. 4.11, the board shall take action on a matter of policy only when the board has discussed the matter at the immediate preceding working session.
Sorry.
Never mind, actually, it can be waived, I'm not concerned about that. That one we talked about, that one we talked about.
That is a change, by the way. It used to say 2 working sessions, now it's just 1.
We used to have two.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's because we just had that conversation.
Yeah, the difference between public meetings and public hearings, and those have been mentioned as the
Consolidated.
one. Because public hearings is when the action was taken. So we'd have a public meeting where we would introduce, an issue or topic. We should the working session to introduce an issue. The public meeting would be where we had our panels and we would discuss it with the public. The next working session would bring that conversation and those points and deliverables back to the working session to hash about, to then move forward to the public hearing where a vote would be taken.
I hope all that's in the onboarding, because I've always been.
Well, we've consolidated.
Yeah, it's been consolidated, that's how it used to be. So when John Paul said it used to be 2 working sessions, this was to make those 2 working sessions into the one and.
Right.
And this is not by any means to reduce discussion, it's to allow the board to work its will.
Right.
Let's simplify.
All right, under, 4.134, where it's the order of business, so we talked about putting in the comments, the reports from people who are representing the board in different places. And then also, it's. No, we talked about inserting in here reports from.
Right, would that be covered under committee and member reports?
4.13. 4.13.
Line 283.
No, I don't think they are committee and member reports. I think they are reports from board members who are representing the board in other meetings. So it would be, for the moment, it's Karen reporting on
So
the
you want-
cross-sector task force, it's Jack reporting on what, whatever official meetings he was in that deserve to be reported back out.
I would think that would be covered under member reports, even though
But the problem is that we've always had member reports and we forget it. That's why I'm trying to get it on the docket. I'm trying to get it on the agenda so that it always comes up and there's, it's always happening.
How do you get your reports?
Or, no,
Well, it's more, it's,
Do you want meeting reports?
yes, a meeting, what would we call it?
it's
Meeting report.
reports from members who have represented the state board at meetings and task forces. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with saying it just like that.
Okay.
Well, it's not, I mean, all right, then, now maybe you'll say this as member reports. Normally, there would be something called new business where you have a chance to sort of raise a new item for sort of the initial discussion to move forward. So I thought we should have new business,
So on the
It's
public
very-
meetings or on the working sessions?
working sessions.
Okay, so that shouldn't, so this is for public meetings. This is
Oh,
usually for public
you know
meetings.
what, I'm sorry, I thought this was, so, let me say, I thought this was the working sessions, which is part of why I'm doing this on Zoom. So what I would say is there should be something comparable to this for the working session, and then I would include that thing that I just mentioned. All right, that makes more sense, I'm
that makes
sorry,
more
that's
sense.
why it wasn't making sense to me,
Gotcha,
I'm
okay.
sorry. And then I would say, probably in both places, but certainly under the working session, there should be a place that's explicitly new business. That is the place where members can raise, this is a big issue, want everyone to know about it, and if people choose to proceed with it. Okay, 5.1, standing committee. The standing committee shall be established to monitor and oversee the state board's budget and governance. And we also talked when we set it up about personnel, and I think it should also, one thing I want us to have some role in hiring. So that when people are being hired on, there's some ability of this group to know what's going on.
For
You're-
which offices?
For the
No,
state.
not for the.
Okay, well, we do that, so we just can put that in, because we try to disseminate, resumes, we try to invite.
We do with the high offices, I don't think we do with the.
No.
Yeah, we did all
It's
of
been
it.
asked if any board members want to be a part of it.
Everything, every hiring that we've done.
And then we saw stuff before it.
Cause our reason
So
is
the
the
resume-
I've set up conference.
No,
Well, you are
Yeah,
intern,
we just sent out the resumes,
you're about half hour
and we
down
supposed to
the
rate them,
personnel
and then we
update the full board.
decided we were going to interview on the telephone, and I invited you into the telephone calls, and then we invited you into the interview, so.
I mean, I remember that going on when we hired John Paul. I don't remember.
I think we got it for Sean. Sean was the last time.
And Sean, but no.
Well, yeah,
John Paul was.
yeah,
No, I don't know if we got it for Paul.
no, we,
I don't know if it would have happened, Paul.
yeah, but.
So, okay.
That's why she
So-
wants to put it in.
Well, I think it's a right practice. I think it's a a right practice. Especially since this issue, okay.
I also don't know how every board member wants to be involved in every decision.
Well, the reality is, it's not, and it's more, it's an ability to do so, it's not.
Well, that's what I said, that we try to get involved, because we all have to work with them.
Yeah, all right, I'm almost done, I think. Ad hoc committees,
Yep.
it says here that the committees are appointed subject to the approval, that the president will identify the committee.
Want that say the chair?
Well, I wanted to be clear that in some cases, the board members also by a majority vote can establish a committee. Maybe,
The state board
The
may
board
establish committees.
establishes, and then the president
And
appoints.
so.
well, but
perhaps
maybe
instead of-
maybe the board wants to identify the charge of the committee.
I think that's fine.
I mean, it's to give both groups the power to do so, and we've done it both ways.
I think that's a great suggestion.
And the same in 5.2.1 would just be a comparable change. And just to clarify in 5.2.4 that we shall not, the ad hoc committee shall notice and conduct in public, except if it's less than a quorum. This makes it sound like if you are a committee, you must do this, and we already established.
He's gonna check with open meetings and work with OAG to refine that language.
I think
Yep.
that might be it.
I really appreciate this discussion, by the way. I think this is really important.
And we want your guys' input too.
Yeah.
If not tonight, call John Paul.
So what did we say on the censure thing?
They were gonna add in the
Add
vote
requirements.
and I think it should be at least a 2/3 vote. I don't think it should be a single majority.
And also, I mean,
All of it is in Robert's.
it's everywhere it should be at the will of the board. In other words, if I do something bad, you all can censure me, but you can't terminate me. Right, yeah, so that was that's what I want, that's what I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's the step, yeah.
And the, okay.
Just don't start acting bad now.
You're on a roll today.
It's so easy. This is like, I just came back from the Northeast, this is nothing. Give me something. Give me something challenging.
Wait till we get the pop.
I did read that.
That's it.
All 63 pages. I actually have corrections on every other page, so get ready.
Good.
Oh, but you're sending it?
No, I'm not.
You wanna stay here tonight and give us all the corrections?
So, unless do members have additional, you're too faithful.
Oh, we've already had that.
Okay. Then I suggest a couple of y'all are gonna work on language changes together and with John Paul. I would suggest a red line of this be circulated no later than probably Monday.
Sure, if folks can get me this stuff by noon Friday, I will have something by Monday.
Yeah, so that we can take a look at it. That will give us more than a week to make additional edits or corrections. And then we can hopefully vote this month.
So moving to the policy manual. First of all, I wanted to thank Jamaica, not only for the conversation of the bylaws, but you've seen the historical knowledge that I have relied on for this year because we have no manual. We have nothing to rely on. And so that's what this, yes, you have, but without your guidance, this year would have been an incredible, horrifyingly awful place for me. I want to publicly recognize how great
It was.
Worse than it was.
Look into the mirror.
So I wanted to make sure that I recognize her publicly for her help in making sure that I was on board as much as possible. So this is still a draft, still work in progress. I did sit down with Joy, well, I guess it's not a call, Joanne and Faith to talk about some of the questions and things, and so there are some updates that you don't have, and I apologize for that. But a lot of the information was taken directly from either the electronic personnel manual or Vega or OAG or other types of things, and so the language comes from there. We can adjust the language whatever we want. I have no problem with any of that. But I did want to call attention to one of the additions that I've made that I will send out to you all tonight, that Joanne and Faith both mentioned, is that there isn't sort of a general human resources section so that we all know where that information for the district personnel manual is. And so I've added that with links to each section so that it's in one place. And until and unless the board adopts a different regulation related to personnel, that's what we follow. I've also clarified some of the information related to the use of sick leave and annual leave and the telework sections after talking with Joanne and Faith to make sure that it's very clear about what those are, because those are the things that really affect our employees directly. And And so, I didn't wanna just leave those as links in the, general human resources sections. So I'm sure that there are things that are missing, so please let me know what those are, so we can add them. And if you think there's additional clarification that needs on anything, please let me know, so that we can have a great manual that we can actually start using in case I get hit by a bus.
And was it where my luck is?
Right. Just have two more things though.
And I just wanna reiterate how important this is. I just wanna reiterate how important this is because Jack and I have been working on doing this for 2 years. Because when the last executive director left.
Executive secretary.
Okay, when the executive director left, the secretary and I and Jack, and then the legal counsel really we didn't have the personnel experience or the procurement experience. We were like, it was a rough 2 years. So this is a combination of, these two documents are a combination of almost 2 years of work. And we like to get it finished, okay? So please give any input to John also.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at that updated stuff. I'm sure you didn't make notes.
I was gonna mention, there is a provision, which I know we talked with John Paul about yesterday, about employees engaging in outside employment, and it prohibits them. And I actually, I'm not sure that other agencies prohibit people from that. It's a conflict of interest issue, right? So I can't serve as a contractor with a public charge school, right? So just kind of be mindful of that. So if it's work at Burger King or something, I think they should do that. I don't want to, but.
Yeah.
Or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So can you talk about where that language comes from, John Paul? And
yeah, so
I'm fine taking that, but I want to know the origin.
Sure. So the section that deals with ethics in the policy manual is literally copied and pasted from chapter 18 of the personnel manual, which is the code of conduct. They didn't change anything. So we can adjust as we need to make sure that it's clear on what we mean by those things. But that's where that language came from.
Okay, is your suggestion to take it all out, or to just say cannot be engaged in additional employment if it creates conflict of interest?
Yeah, it's a conflict of interest issue, I think.
But don't we have a section that speaks to so
Yeah.
I just don't even know why it would even.
HR's orientation.
Yeah, so I think if it's conflict of interest, I mean, I did editorial work for a professor. I don't wanna be terminated because I worked 5 hours, doing that. So I think, I don't even know why we really have to even mention it here, but we should have a area maybe that speaks to conflict of interest. I know that's probably under the ethics, some of the ethics things, or I don't know if there's, this is volume, so I cannot remember every section, but I think if we speak about ethics, then that's the best place I think to put conflict of interest.
Yeah, the section on ethics that talks about the employees part of it, and I'm still not clear exactly how board members are affected or not by this, because the way that the manual reads, it reads that employees of the district would include board members in this for these types of things because of the way that you're listed as district government employees, so you're receiving a salary from the district. And so we can certainly work on language to make sure that it's clear on who we're talking about, but the provision that we're talking about says employees shall not engage in outside employment or activities, including seeking or negotiating for employment that conflict with their official government duties and responsibilities. So I think that covers it to make sure.
I would like to see the context, because sometimes I think we pull stuff, we don't actually have the context. And
sure. So
I would,
in the draft that I said, there's a link directly to the right section, and then it actually goes on to the next section in the manual, which is page 35 for those following along at home. It talks about the specific elected officials' conflict of interest, which again came from Vega specifically. So we can certainly look and try to wordsmith or make it more accessible too. I mean, sometimes that regulatory language is not easiest to understand what we mean, and so. Sorry,
no, I'm just kind of getting nervous because I've worked on past elections, and although I didn't involve myself, obviously, my board members recently up for election while I was making sure the poles were ADA compliant, so now.
I don't think that applies at all,
Doesn't apply,
but even if it,
losing money in that area, it's, the Hatch Act applies to that. That has nothing to do with this act.
And then I think that we also might want to get clarity, like, say, for example, in Sean's departure, you know, there are certain things that he could not be helpful or continue to be helpful in now that he's no longer with us. And so I think that that also needs to be kind of detailed for other staff as well. Like, if something were to happen and anybody was to leave, like, you know, if we know that, like, say, for example, never mind, that's fine. I remember, but if I were to, I know that there'd be certain things, obviously, that I couldn't be involved in, but
yeah.
I think that
Well,
that
actually,
needs to be spelled out as well.
So if you were to go to that place, it actually wouldn't apply, but if you were to go to a different place outside of government, then there are restrictions on our ability, for our staff, on our abilities to work on certain issues. So for instance, if I were to depart and go to somewhere that would have business before the board, I wouldn't be able to work on that for at least a year.
And where does that come from? Where does that step from?
That's hilarious though, it's not like we control a budget. What do we need to do?
Well, I've
Grant
dealt with the
$1 million?
budget, so I really would be.
Yeah.
That's part of
No,
the,
it's, but that applies
that's
to
a
that.
DC.
It's all government employee
Yeah.
salary, so
So that's just a DC.
covers everybody. It covered Sean.
Yeah.
So
Sean can't,
where couldn't you go to work?
Sean cannot come and testify before us for at least a year on any issues.
After a year, he's coming every month though.
Yeah. He's watching.
Luckily, he is watching.
There's also no grievance policy that I think should be.
Yeah, and I didn't bring that up specifically, but it is listed on one of the HR things, and we can certainly, it's a part of the personnel manual and the process, and we can bring up the specific wording.
I prefer to default to the district personnel manual on specific things like that.
I would say yes, I would say maybe in some aspects, but there might be other things that I know we've had an opportunity, you know, to experience it, but I think there may be things that you, I don't know, I would say we could start with that as a frame of reference, but also think about perhaps, even other experiences that may have already occurred as to how that may or may have not been able to fit the needs of our independent status as an agency. Because theirs would speak, I think, more specifically to DCHR. Most of their things default to Executive Office of the Mayor agencies, and so I would just encourage us to look more deeply at, do all those different things actually really apply to the independent status
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean,
agency?
I think having something like that would be specific on what we're sort of recommending if there are changes from CHR policy, I think that would be something that would be important to bring to the board.
Yeah, I mean, just for example, so if an employee has a grievance, they can't go to DCHR in the same way as if they were part of the Executive Office of the Mayor. So that's an issue. So if they can't go there to appeal something, then I know there is some language about appealing, I think, in the bylaws or stuff somewhere. But I think a grievance policy would help give some direction for employees as to where to go.
I just caution us, unless we're lawyers or getting official legal counsel on this, I don't know that most board members have the knowledge and the skills to craft a policy that's standalone and unique to us. And I'd be very concerned about creating something that.
Why can't the employees here go to DCHR?
Because we're part of an independent agency. That's what we're told. So that kind of removes.
So, yeah, the personnel authority is the state board currently, and will change then on the omnibus, but the grievance that would go to the personnel authority.
So why can't we have a MOU for them to, so they can go to HR?
Have a what?
Memorandum of understanding.
I don't.
Independent agencies have done that before.
And we've had an MOU in the past. We don't have one currently, but Director Gibson from DCHR is reviewing our previous MOUs to see what their new shared services on how that would work for us, and what the cost would be for us to have a specific MOU like that.
We used to pay for that
$5,000.
Yeah, it used to be $5,000 a year.
And, which, I don't know what we got for that 5,000. Cause I became the FMLA coordinator and backup payroll and.
Well, let's do two things, if I may suggest. One, continue follow-up on the memorandum of understanding from Mark's request. And two, if you have specific language that you would like to propose to the board, just get that to John Paul. And, again, I don't wanna rush this process, but sooner's better than later.
Anything?
I mean, we can delay until January on this stuff, but, I wanna make sure that the new leadership team has this stuff in place so that he or she can be.
Even if it's I think even if it's an understanding of where we're going and what we're gonna be doing, but I think it's really important to have.
And I just wanna make sure, is it a concern around the fact that we don't, as an agency, have legal counsel to create the grievance policy? Or if legal counsel would be necessary for a grievance action that would be taken, to the board? That would then, wouldn't that be the Attorney General that would still, we have a
Both
memorandum?
would be OAG.
Right. So I didn't understand if it's just around the crafting of the policy or if it's in a need for a legal response.
My concern?
Yes.
My concern is, I don't know enough about human resources, Karen knows enough about human resources, to craft a policy that would withstand legal scrutiny, and that wouldn't actually cause the board to be at more risk rather than at less risk. Like if we just create our own policy, we could open ourselves up to additional risk and provide fewer lanes of redress for employees.
As a staff person, it's kind of off-putting for that not to be in place.
Well taken. I totally get that. So let's try to work with, if you guys can create some language, and then we can work with OAG to try and look at it. My personal thing is I'm just very concerned that we'd be creating a personnel rule without the knowledge to know if we're doing the right thing.
Right. And could DCHR still provide, technical assistance in that area in the crafting? So I know we don't currently have any MOU in place, but once we do, hopefully if that moves forward quickly, I still think that we could use it as a frame and still get some of their support and and their HR knowledge, to maybe ensure that it's at the right place in addition to, OAG.
Yeah, and what I would say, just to add, and I don't 706, so, so aware of that. I would just say that certainly we have, and we talked to John Paul on this yesterday, some very strong language around, if you violate something, you could be terminated. And so just, for me, then you should have some protections around that too, right? So whether it's a grievance policy or something else going to DCHR, so.
Well, and I think the other thing to look at is, does a staff policy manual for the state board translate into the same staff policy for either office? And I'm not sure it does. So trying to maybe cobble the structure together is not the right way to go.
For example, I want to raise this point again. I think that, for example, it indicates the offices, the staff of the core staff of the agency, it lists A, B, and C, the ombudsman, the student advocate, and the SBOE. But then everything else goes on to say that those are the staff. It says that the staff will ensure that the members have meet material. The staff will request 15 copies of witness testimony. The assumption, if I'm reading this, and if I'm just coming at this completely out of the blue, I would assume that the staff of the ombudsman's office, the staff of the student advocate's office could be pulled together to do all of these different things in preparation for meetings, et cetera, et cetera. I think there needs to be some clarification as to who the SBOE staff is, who the ombudsman staff is, who the student advocate staff is, and separation so that is made clear. Because it can be confuddled, and someone else may say, well, your responsibility, someone say one of your assistants or something, if some other person within, the office is out or something, can they be pulled in to do this? Is that their responsibility? And if they are they in defiance of this, if they don't do it, So I just think it's just a little bit more carefully a little bit more careful phrasing and specificity would be important throughout this document. I've seen it in a lot of things in other places as well. The other thing I have a question about, and John Paul, I think a little bit more attention needs to be paid to what your duties are, because it says you manage the day-to-day operation and you communicate directly with the state board president. To say you communicate directly with the state board president doesn't say that much to me. It just says you talk directly to the president, and then who else talks to the president? Who else talks to the I mean, if that's going to be used, then maybe that needs to be specified for the ombudsman and for the student applicant, who they communicate directly with. I guess the assumption, it's kind of left moot, kind of I think. Unless it's, again, everybody reports to the executive director. So, if that's the case, then they need to say who they communicate directly with.
To be very clear, that is not the case at all, and we're trying to get away from that rather than moving towards
right, but I just think this is, so, it's an incongruent, your description of your job is kind of incongruent with that of the others, which does detail some specifics about what they do, and yours is just very general and broad, but I think it could be a little bit more.
Do you think that needs to be in the bylaws?
Hmm?
Do you think that needs to be in the bylaws versus like a job description?
Oh, no, I don't think the job description, there's no real job description component within the bylaw, but I think it could be spelled out maybe more clearly. What is the managing the day-to-day operations? You do whatever, communicating directly with the state board president.
Part of the reason that I didn't put specificity here for my job title is because there's so much that is just the admin day-to-day operations that honestly would have taken a couple pages to write them all. And part of it as well is I think the person in this position needs to be fairly flexible and be willing, and especially since we do have such a small staff, we all pitch in on so many things that's why I put on mine fairly general. I'm happy to put any specificity that the board wants. That would be great. But
I'd suggest you could make it be as simple as direct the board's administrative functions and direct staff policy work or something to that nature could encapture all of the work that you do.
Manages data operations, coordinates the official meeting, the officiates at the meetings. There are a bunch of things that I know that you do, but maybe there's another way to kind of make it more succinct. But to add that phrase and communicates directly with the state board president, that kind of, for one thing, that should be kind of subsumed under operation of the state board office, but to just kind of state that out there, it makes it sound as if there should be an and for everybody else's somewhere, because you got these two clauses together.
And again, any other language that deals with the student advocate and the ombudsman, we'll get from writing from you that you're okay with what we put in here. Okay? Because we want to make sure that it's responsive to legislation that's pending and to your needs.
And there are two sections that I'm not sure if I actually printed them out or not, or sent them to you. There are two sections available in the appendices to make sure that both offices have space to put whatever they want to put about these types of things. In general, when we talked yesterday, just yesterday? Long week. Part of these things is, when the omnibus goes through and they are independent personnel authorities, this will apply to the office of the state board, and it doesn't necessarily have to apply then to the ombudsman or student advocate. And so some of these differences may be moved at that point. So there are questions about exactly how agency level we want this to be versus onboarding for our individual offices, because they are very different when we're onboarding staff to each of the individual offices. So,
and nothing in this would preclude you from creating your own policy manuals for your offices.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I do want to make clear is that from the hearing that we're part of in early November, Chairman Grasso stated that he expected the state board to do facilitation. And I've just heard talk about how far should we go? Should we provide support to the Office of the Ombudsman, the Chief Student Advocate, or the Office of the Student Advocate, when you become more independent? And I think the expectation was that things would remain as they are, that we would still get assistance with procurement and HR and some other things. So I just want to kind of put that out there so that I'm hoping that we're all hopefully clear.
That should
be in the manual.
That's a given, and that's why we need to have the discussion operationally about the MOUs, not only for the state board, but also for the student advocate and the ombudsman. It should flow down. Whatever that MOU that we have in place, and if you all wanna have a discussion, whether we share the cost or whatever, that's another issue. But whatever MOU we have in place, it should flow down. And so for me, that's a given. We should still help with facilitation.
It's like when the board came on talking to Marcy, there were still some things, eventually they started doing less, but there were still some things, like still with the OCFO dynamic on the final sign off on direct vouchers or whatever, we still have to deal with OSSI for reconciling the credit card and things like that, so. Yeah.
Is there anything specific else that we want to talk about on the policy manual? And please feel free to continue to send me edits, and I'll continue to update it as well.
Annual report, and then hopefully we can do an executive director's report.
Sure. I did want to note, Laura, thank you very much, sent me some edits to the credit flexibility section, which I have not incorporated in this printed version, but I will and send it out again. So this is the draft text only of the year-end report, which is required by our bylaws. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes, in our current bylaws.
And so certainly send me copy edits as well.
We've already started them.
But if there are substantive questions or thoughts about the way things are presented, I want to hear those as well. Or it looks great and we can.
I think the people who did their own section should review,
Yeah.
like the health one and the diploma one.
The reason this is a really helpful tool is that then we use this going into our performance oversight hearing, and we use this in going into our budget hearing. And so all of our testimony gets based off of this work.
And remind us, who are the key audiences? So that would be council and who else?
Primarily council.
But it's also something that we can use when we're talking about the activities of the board, when we're at PTO meetings or PTA meetings and those sorts of things. So it makes it more real about what we're actually working on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the type of language, right? So is it wonky language? So what I did, I just pulled from the credit flexibility report and tried to make it a little bit more formal, the way that we described our work there. But I don't think I think I would use the more accessible language if it was with a different audience. So that's why I'm asking that.
I think it could be helpful in both, because I think there is from the new board members and having them coming on, explaining exactly what the state board is and what it does. So if it was an accessible language, it would be easier for those people to comprehend. So.
My overall impression is that this is an opportunity to showcase not just the work of the board this year, but the important role state boards of education play in creating the foundations for excellence, equity, choice, you name it. But I gotta say, that put my editor's hat on, the headline on this is just, I mean, we don't capitalize on the good work that Laura's committee did. I mean, we have credit flexibility that allows kids, in theory anyway, to earn high school PE credit if they play varsity sport or excel at math. So there's some real important pathways that opened up by the work that this board did. But here we say, oh, we've got these hurdles, we put let's, let's write a headline and pitch our product, just not only in an accessible way, but in a way that showcases how without the State Board of Education, all this really good stuff might not have happened.
I'd love to see more.
Say something slightly similar, but, is if, and I don't know if this is yet the case on the credit flexibility, but if it is on the diploma, that, and again, partly this is, I was running ahead, but I put in some real examples. I mean, as a result of that, the X school is doing this so-and-so and providing, course credit to students who are doing this and such. And on the state diploma, sort of highlight, this is the number of people who got diplomas this year, this was their backgrounds. I mean,
yeah, we have pictures from the first graduation ceremony this past Saturday. So this is an agency annual report. We're not an agency. We're policy leaders, and we're playing in a space that is unique to state boards of education. DCPS cannot pass Common Core standards. They can follow them, they can adopt them as their own, they can adopt some other standards, but we're setting the academic expectations for every kid in every subject in every grade level. That's the authority of the board, and good things flow from that, at least according to the evidence. So let's stop, let's just step up our game a little bit and talk about how we helped you, what we did for you lately. And in that context, I think the work of the Ombudsman and this Chief Student Advocate became crystal clear in the value that they add in this big education space where lots of cooks are stirring the pot.
Mary, where you said that we're not an agency and that the policy, the staff, inclusive of the State Board Ombudsman and Student Advocate, we are an agency. Like, board members may not be, so depending on who the audience is and who, the direction that this is going, as far as who your intended message and audience is, I, as an employee, am not a policy person, but in this document, as far as the workings and the mechanics and the function of the agency, that's where I become real. And with the Ombudsman's office, some of the things that they do don't actually create or implement policy, but it can, light a fire under you as elected officials to maybe discuss policy changes that may need to take effect in the city. So I hear what you're saying, but I somewhat disagree in saying that we are not an agency because there's layers to this. And so in this, you gotta kind of we're trying to put our best foot forward as far as an agency, as staff, as programs, as policy, as education, as elected officials, as all of that. And, sometimes with everybody having their own perspective, point of view, silo, you kind of only see it as one way. And the quickness of my being able to read this, into Paul's credit of not being here very long, I think he did his best in trying to capture all of that as best as possible.
I didn't write this.
Sean wrote a lot of this before.
Okay, well,
It's like on YouTube.
I think that's kind of a document. I mean, you can have many different, you can transfer this kind of the content to a lot of different audiences and a lot of different formats. This information, all the information is again correct and true and accurate. But I think, from this, I guess in the role as communications person, I mean, many kinds of pieces can be developed from this kind of information. I mean, you can create brochures, the handouts, you can go out to meet the public, a report to the council, you can do a report to, another agency, it could be sent to a reporter, and they can take that information and develop their own pieces, or maybe come back and do investigations or whatever, interviews and all that. So I think this is a good piece. I have some editorial comments, of course, but I think from this kind of piece, other kinds of things can be developed and suit many of the purposes that the board has, and many of the audiences that the board has to address. So.
But I think
You can't make one document everything for everybody.
No, I would just, but this to me is the B-roll.
Yeah, this is the one.
You know, you wanna lead with something that puts the lens and the focus on the work of the board and the benefits it paid, and then you can go piece by piece.
Yeah.
But I don't think having, you know,
This is like, this kind of pyramid, not that.
again, the editors can go at this for a long time.
But I still think that it misses the opportunity to really educate even more deeply people. We are an agency. We are led by an elected board, who are, you know, education policy leaders. But I feel like it can take a very long time, as I've learned from my own experience this year. But I do think that, at least when I go out into the community, some people really understand the agency, and even the role of the board, but many people really don't. And so I think that, and even people who should understand don't, and so they say the wrong thing. So I do think that it's really a great opportunity to not just highlight the elected leadership, but also even the internal, not for many pages, but, you know, some type of brevity, you know, the inner workings of the agency too. And also, out of that, I still don't, if I didn't work within this agency, I don't know if any of this will really, maybe the descriptions of the individual things, but I don't know if I would finish the first page and say, well, this is what they do for me, and why I should really care. So I think this is a great opportunity to craft language that, at least this is what I hope I did this year, craft language that you can use again. You know, so next year you won't have to, you know, come up with all of that, but that can really help people see, like, here is what, and I go back to that, like, organizational chart, offering that within here, also offering useful context. So really thinking of this as a true promotional piece you could give someone, but also pieces that you could break off too as you need to, because I think people still, the agency and elected leadership of the agency work very hard, but I don't know if, other than the individual descriptions, that it really does justice to the other things that you do besides the individual descriptions that are listed here. So to really think about it in that way, because I think it can be hard to digest, so making it in a way that's digestible, but also honors the work that's done within the agency and elected leadership.
That's a really good point. And, you know, even if it's just talking about the sheer numbers, the sheer volume of calls that come in, of people who come before the board to give public comment, of the community members who you have even fielded a call from, not necessarily cases closed, but just in toto, there is an awful lot of engagement with a wide variety of people, from policy experts to, you know, people getting the wrong number, to people who want to talk for an hour about something. And we have to, and we do handle them all. So that's, you know, it's something to be very proud about, and it's work that goes completely unnoticed and unsung outside of our circles. So, you know, that's why, you know, I'm in the business of writing. So,
Yeah.
You put your best foot forward, but you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them what you told them.
So let me see if I can capture this for John Paul. Mary, would you help us write a new intro that is a little jazzier and a little
Depends on the deadline. I've got a couple of my own.
Okay. I think if you could help us improve it, I'd appreciate that help. And
You want to write my article?
No, I don't.
You want to write edit a cover story on quantum computing? I bet you do.
Well, we again would love to try and get this done while the members who did this work are still on board, so that they can show what they've done, what we worked on, what they've accomplished. So I'd love to do this in December, in 2 weeks. I'd also asked John Paul if you can put more language in here regarding what our board does and the importance of having a state board. And what am I forgetting? Camille, am I forgetting something that you said?
Public engagement?
Pardon?
I had And because we are an agency and we bring the ombudsman and the student advocate, I think it might be helpful to have a portion dedicated to each of their offices, perhaps with some of the metrics that you guys have throughout the year, and I'm sure you guys keep those. How many cases, how many parents talk to, and then moving forward, especially since we do this on a yearly basis, having each board member perhaps keep tabs on metrics, how many community events each board member went to individually each year, how many events, how many how many speaking engagements, how many roundtables we hosted, and then also doing that with each public hearing, how many people testified throughout the year to the board. Metrics show, and data show to the outside world how relevant we actually are.
And what we've accomplished. So on the Ombudsman and Student Advocate, I did have that thought. You have some executive summaries if you'd like us to incorporate that into this. If you want to even just modify your summaries, I think that would be a terrific piece to add in here. But if you don't want to do that because you've already issued your own reports, you would not.
I would appreciate the opportunity to do that. I mean, we are part of the agency, and so I would not to write a full report, it's hopefully to make a link to the very lengthy ones we've already written. But I would appreciate the opportunity to do that. Do you know when you want that? Or you can just let us know.
Again, we would love to vote. I would love to be able to vote on this too.
Yeah, I just didn't know.
So my suggestion is that on this, I mean, I like the where we give the descriptions of things. I agree with everything that says it should be more about what we accomplished and what we did for people. I love the idea of including those reports if they can be in there. I think that's great. On where we list all the process stuff that we did, we opened a new office, we have new personnel, we, had a vote on our budget. I think that is, should all get sort of compacted into a few paragraphs that say something like it's, we're still a new agency and we're still working on these new things, and thank goodness for all of our great people here and we're a little further along. Something like that. I think a lot of this should not be in that. Some of them, however, let me just say this and then everybody can jump on it, is where there's work from a committee, I think it should be shown. So for example, the Closing the Opportunity Gap Committee, I mean, it did research, it has data on the teacher turnover that it looked at, and I think that should get included in this.
Our challenge was to keep it brief enough so that people would read it, and to really, the more we put in, the more board members will find fault with. The more we leave out, it seems, the more board members will find fault with.
So I'm offering to take out most of this page and replacing it with something on the content that came out of the Opportunity Gap Committee. So it's a suggestion, that's all I have to say about it. But
That's a good point, and I also think your committee's work, because
I can go next year.
I mean, no, because this is a new federal law that will shape every school. We were out in front, engaging the public. We had meetings and forums in every ward. We had additional meetings. This is a big deal. And we led the work. And it's continuing work, so.
And I think part of the reasoning or the vision of doing this is that annual reports passed, we would outline all of the standard state educational resolutions that were passed, whether it was graduation requirements, whether it was language, whether it was homeschooling, all of that. And because there wasn't that much of that, this was still a way to capture the work of the board that wasn't a formal resolution or action that the board actually voted on to be implemented or to be a standard for DC. So this was a way to still highlight work of the board and not have to.
No, I get it. I'm just saying, I mean, for example, we participated and worked with the deputy mayor on the education's cross-sector task force. I mean, I don't care unless we accomplish something there, right? We brought to that task force this idea, which is now happening. Otherwise, we revised the bylaws to reflect the initiative, I mean, I just don't think that's worth reporting. some of them I do, the opportunity gap, I would talk about the Reaching Proportionate Voices Committee and the things that are in place as a result of it. So I'm just saying, all I wanna say is I take the substantive things and make them clear we've accomplished something, and the other stuff
To echo that, anything that really talks about the core mission, which we've kind of defined as how do we narrow the opportunity gap, narrow the gaps, and push education standards to a higher level, those are the things I'd love to see.
It's everything that
more
answers the question,
detail.
what do we do for you? What do we do for the kids
What
in the
is the
city?
value of
Right. Okay, you can take all that and.
So, I mean, to be frank, we have the staff capacity right now in the next week and 2 days to add everything that you're asking for. So either someone on the board needs to do this drafting and write it, or we can push this to January and we can work on it for another month and a half, which is totally fine. But understand, I can't do all this myself.
Is this a document something that's to be posted somewhere, is it for our purposes, or we could
Last
distribute
year's-
it to someone? Is
last
it
year-
like an annual report requirement?
In our bylaws, there is a year-end review report requirement. Last year, I submitted it to council as part of the public record, as our year reports, that it would be part of the council's record during our agency oversight meetings and those sorts of things, so there would be documentation ahead of things. So we can submit that, sort of whatever we want ahead of the oversight and budget meetings. But, sorry.
This is
It's to be next up after you're done.
This is basically our template for those council meetings in early next year for our hearings. And having an official vote on this document will make creating the testimony for those two hearings much easier. Just like having the vote on the budget makes it easier because.
Well, can we adopt it sort of kind of in principle and in a usable way, but then also have this idea to enhance in the ways we've discussed as we move into the spring, or is it not?
Paul can do whatever, or John Paul and his staff can do whatever to the document. We just need to get something through.
I mean, I'm just gonna say,
That
for
board members
me,
are happy.
I don't have any problem even approving it as it is. I just think that everything that's been said, two things. One, the more that can be incorporated as we move into public settings, the better. And the other thing I'd say is we had almost exactly the same conversation last year. And so what I'd really suggest is, as we think about all of this as advice for next year too, what should that report look like? And to sort of think about it in these terms.
I mean, I would love for the report to be even broader and pull out a couple of citywide issues that we're seeing. If we're getting a lot of complaints about bullying and disciplinary issues, we as policy leaders should have a report that says the ombudsman saying this, the student advocate saying this, we're seeing it, the teachers union is seeing it. This is something that we as a city need to really address holistically. I would love to move in that direction and really make us policy leaders have this report, not just say what we've done, but what we as a city need to do and what we as a board can lead in terms of facilities or something of that nature. I think we've got a lot of opportunity to do that.
And I know it's a short time ago, but I would have to say it's easier to write our reports because we are writing in our own voice. It's very hard for people who are already working very hard on your behalf, and it's a very small staff, to write in your own voice. So I know that you're busy, but I would also just encourage, and I know you didn't ask me, but to think about some language that you might want to have there, even if you are very busy, because it's hard for John Paul, for Jamaica, for Paul, to reflect your voice that you want.
It's not to reflect our voices, it's to have a voice for the board. And I agree, it's
right,
not,
but it's still your voice, still not necessarily John Paul or Jamaica or Paul's. So I'm just saying, when we are writing our reports, we are writing from our own voice, and we have staff that contributes a little bit, but we wrote from our own voice, which I think is 9 voices, but I would just really appeal for the support for them, especially in what you're asking, so it won't be a repetitive thing each year. Maybe it's a structure that needs to be put in place so that there's more time.
when there's a properly set. That's why I'm saying I don't see it as necessary to have it absolutely perfect this month when we're staffed and when we're moving into the spring. That's the time to do it.
Yeah, I still think even with more staff, it's still your voice as a board.
It's not just the staffing issue, although I completely relate to that. but it's a way of framing our work so that we're not inside the bubble. It's not a checklist, although the checklist can go in the back. It's saying, how did we promote equity, excellence, quality, etc.? And for goodness sakes, the District of Columbia's voice was at the head of the table deciding that every student succeeds at. And now we're at the head of our table here, leading that effort. And transitioning from No Child Left Behind, which everyone agreed was a flawed law, to something else. And that's big. That's a big headline. And the work on credit flexibility and giving sort of credit for competency, and sort of saying where that can lead. You just billboard it a little bit. But it's a way of thinking of the board's work that isn't, I'm reporting to the council every year. It's constantly reminding everybody, including the council, where the board's singular authority helps promote across the board excellence for every kid.
Yeah.
And measures what excellence looks like, and corrects course when things are going wrong, and identifies problems like bullying or whatever, and addresses it through policy, which is more responsive to the needs of today's teens than what we had even 8 years ago. Just, it's framing the narrative, that's all. It's not, the facts aren't there, it's showcase, the reason we did this is X.
All right, let's see what we can do the next week in a couple days. And board members have language finished John Paul. We've got one more piece that John Paul needs to report on.
Well, 3 actually pieces. Our NASB committee memberships, we need to report those by December 19th. And I'll send information about this, but we can do, I hope, an informal sort of poll on who will serve on the NASB committees. There's 2, it's the Public Education Positions Committee and then the Government Affairs Committee. And like I said, I'll send information, but NASB wanted that information by December 19th, which is after our next, or excuse me, before our next public meeting. So I just wanted to highlight that. We are in the process of hiring the replacement for Sean. I'm doing between now and next Friday 15 interviews for 4 for policy fellows and 11 for potential candidates for the policy analyst position. Once we do the first round of that, I'll make recommendations on who to bring in for in-person interviews to the governance committee, and then move forward from that. My hope is to move forward with this quickly enough that we can have someone in place as early as possible in January, so that we can have someone there ready to help with the CASA work as quickly as possible.
So how are you doing the interviews?
The first round is I'm doing telephone round with the same 10 questions for each of the 11 candidates, and thanks very much to Paul and Jamaica for helping me with the questions to make sure that they covered it. And it's a 100-point scale. Like I said, it's the exact same questions, and so I'll be grading. I'll be doing it just on that scale to make sure that it's fair and documented on exactly why people are moving forward or not. We received, well, originally the list was 55 resumes, and I culled it down to 11 to do phone interviews with. So we have some really, really strong candidates. On that point, we need to talk about moving back slightly to the strategic plan, about implementation of the strategic plan. We need more help. We can't, policy-wise, do this with even a single policy person. So my recommendation to the board is that I ask DCHR if we can open the slot for a second policy analyst, which was the FTE that we received from council this last year. We have the open spot to hire a policy analyst at this point. And my suggestion would be to go ahead and do that now.
So we have 2.
We'd have 2.
We'd have 2 policy people then for the board, 1 staff. Jamaica, what's your title? Staff assistant. I'm sorry. You're more than an assistant, which always trips me up. And then Paul, who is our
program support specialist.
Correct. To help with the engagement piece, but Grasso did not want us to have anyone who was a communications person, so he's doing policy and engagement. So got one FTE open, and what's on the board is to make that position a policy position to help us accomplish the strategic plan we're gonna vote on. Are there objections to that, or other suggestions?
Can I just
where we
raise
do
one
that?
thing, and I feel it's late, and I don't have anything much to put, to say specifically, but I would participate in a conversation on this. I mean, I wonder on the policy side, if it wouldn't be better to have a much more senior person instead of two junior people. I just think we are so,
Totally agree.
I mean, and
Somebody who is an exceptional writer.
who's an exceptional writer who can help lead, I mean, we've got 13 voices, all from on one thing or another are capable of I mean, it's.
Is that
But-
a budgetary constraint?
And I think part of it ought to be to sort of think about then how you would define that job in ways as, for example, part of that job could be defining two issues that we're gonna do a report on, and it's gonna be in that final report. I mean, it's sort of a way of thinking about these different things that we do. Or, for example, if on the state report card, if we don't get in some of the things that we think need to be put in, it can be our place to have our own report on the city. So I think and I could be part of a brainstorming about what that person could do and define it, so that is one more
Before
senior
you-
person.
I think you can have someone who's more senior than policy analyst and then a policy assistant.
So, two just points of information. There is currently a classification freeze in the district, and we cannot classify new positions. I don't know how long that's gonna last, but it's likely to last 4 to 5 months.
You can't classify them at all, or you can't. So then how
DCHR
can
will
you
not
hire
classify,
people?
because our policy analyst person was already classified. It's an existing position within the agency, so I fought and got them to,
So then can you hire the second one anyway?
think so. I'm gonna fight for it,
But they're not allowing us to hire anyone at a senior,
Well,
more.
what we need to do is find an existing position within the district government, and I don't know that someone like what you're talking about exists.
I'm sure, do you think, yes?
Not
I
really.
do, I know, I've seen it.
We can, I will happily look. I'm just saying that the classification process has been a stumbling block, I think, for us in the past. I'm trying to make sure, like, even for making small adjustments to what Sean, before he left, I actually asked him to look over the position description and see if there's any updates that we needed to make. DCHR refused to make any of those changes because it would be a reclassification of the position. So, I'm happy to do that. I just understand it would mean probably another, at least month or two of not having a position.
Well, I think getting it right is more important than the month or two, that would be my view.
But are you the one that's shouldering the burden?
And there's no guarantee that DCHR would allow that at the end of the day. And if we want to fight and try and steal someone, it's gonna be really hard to steal the position from the new chancellor.
I don't know, you said actually steal the position or just the description?
Just the description.
So are you saying that if we found an actual description of a job that existed somewhere else, we could post that job?
Maybe. Maybe.
And the other thing I'd say is right now, because the administration's coming to a close, there is like a great talent pool out there. So
I'm actually
I think-
very excited by the candidates that we have. I'm kind of glad the way that we posted, so the position didn't close until December 1st, and I made sure to tell as many folks within US Ed as possible, and I think a lot of the candidates, the 11 candidates that we have, I think are incredibly high qualified. There's a number of folks with advanced degrees, including full PhDs in research doing ed policy.
Which may or may not be what we actually.
Yeah.
It's true.
Question, our board members interested in standing, dialing into the telephone, is that an issue for you if they?
I would prefer to do the first round myself.
Okay.
But I'll be part of the interview round.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking.
Yeah, I think in the interview round, I think that's appropriate. I don't, frankly, it's 11 hours. Conference the next.
Well, and you've got to meet a certain threshold, so there's inequality. So if you've got a panel that's constantly shifting, that's
Well, I
much
don't-
harder to meet.
Yeah. Well,
So,
well, if you're asking the same 10 questions, yeah.
but it's still a
Yeah,
different
but that's a
dynamic.
different
You've
thing,
got
right,
people,
right,
and
right.
You can't go off script, so it's
Yeah.
just easier
Yeah, I'm just,
for that initial.
I mean, so that issue came up, right?
Yeah, and Joanna actually did a really good job with it when hiring the new assistant, is making sure that there was a good panel of folks and that was the same panel each time to make sure that things were consistent and there was really great chart actually that I'm willing to steal about doing the
Everyone
questions.
else is
So, I guess the question is, so no, for the second position now? Or should I?
Why don't you email the full board your proposal?
And then.
And the restrictions that we're faced with.
I will send all the information about that. The last piece is information that I just got today from the Mayor's Budget Office. Enhancements for FY18 were due November 28th, and they didn't actually tell us until today. So I have talked to Justin, and we are still able to submit some enhancement requests to the mayor's staff for including in the budget, but he needs those as soon as possible. So
voted on those last month though.
No, not the full FY18 enhancement request. What we did is we had a small list, and we said that we were going to discuss again if there were any additions, including additional FTEs, if there were additional those types of requests about whatever we wanted. If we wanted to do a research project for surveying or whatever, we said we were going to discuss that, but we need to do it quickly. Okay, how much do you want for it? 30 grand? Okay.
For what?
Did you? Go ahead.
To do to survey, families and teachers in the city on issues that are relevant to the policy issues that we're doing, so that we actually have a way of getting a representative view of people.
Any other?
I mean, without the list you provided.
Why don't you go ahead and circulate that short list, and then board members who would seek enhancements reply to John Paul with a description of that enhancement and an amount of that enhancement. And that goes.
Does that include personnel?
Yes, that would go.
Right. I'll
send them in, and what is the timeline on that?
Well, again, the due date was
a month ago.
So yes, he said ASAP. So
we need to return 24 hours. So everyone return.
Okay. I will.
Are you going to send us an email, or do we need to?
I will send you an email tomorrow morning.
Can we go?
Sure.
Anything else, folks?
Yeah. The order.
I have a question for John Paul in reference to our SBOE goal.
Yes.
Do you have an updated number? Because I know the number that DSLBD sent to the mayor suggests that we're not meeting our goal. And I know SOAR may not have captured it, so if you can give me an update.
Are we talking 16 or 17?
16.
In that, I went to the training, was it 2 weeks ago, John Paul, the APC training?
Yeah.
So a lot of agencies were in agreement that what DSLBD is capturing doesn't always reflect what we do. Like, I can honestly say, and Joy, can let you know this too, I check the CBE website, I check the DC Supply Schedule vendors list, whether it's a business card, a t-shirt, anything. Like, if they're not on that, I have to get at least 3 no bids or 3 bids that are ridiculous for our budget before I will even entertain a non-CBE or non-DC Supply Schedule vendor. And they had a gentleman from DSLBD come to the, it was part of the purchase card thing, and they, several agencies from NPD, DCPS, all of them were saying that sometimes what DSLBD reported as CBE expenditures was erroneous.
No, I get that. It may not be capturing it, but the mayor mentioned it to me, and it makes me look bad, because I can't be out there fighting for the city to reach their goals, and she's aggressively issuing these goals and mandates to agencies. And if I say ABC is not happening, and she'll say, well, what are you guys doing over at the State Board of Education when they're reporting that we got a small goal because we got a small budget, but still, what's being reported is dismally way below our goal. I just need the evidence. I'm not saying that we're not reaching it. I'm not saying we're not making progress. That's not what I'm saying at all. But give me something so I can say, Madam Mayor, that's not accurate. This is what's going on. This is what we're doing in our agency.
Sure. I mean, the last time I talked to the SLBD, they said that in 16 that we were compliant, so I'm interested to receive what information?
The mayor has an issue to go, but I have the book right here, and they're saying that we're not.
Right, that's.
Like,
And
they
this is what they've
always
given the mayor.
were relying on
Right,
purchase
already.
orders.
Right.
And a lot of our expenditures are purchase card. And they just, OCP and JP Morgan just added a little checkbox where you could say whether or not this vendor is CBE, why or why not. Whether they were, you know, whether it was, proprietary, whether they weren't, whether they were in excess of whatever that is, 14% or whatever. So those are different, those are different check boxes that you can check off whether or not this vendor was CBE or not, but they just added that. But I promise.
No, I'm sure you are, that's why I asked.
Anything
But
else?
it
I'm
would
glad
help.
you brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up. I'll check with the SLBD and try to figure out what they reported, because.
I'm telling you,
The timeline.
but more importantly, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just document where you're spending and where it's not being captured. And so we can say, it's not being captured here.
So Mark,
And that's valuable information for the mayor to know, because if something is not being captured, then she can say, oh, this is something we need to correct.
It's an
in the
ongoing,
government.
we even include it in our budget stuff that we submit to the council. That very same information, that's why so that I'm not looking at credit card statements at the 11th hour for the year, I continually do it.
So Mark,
I'm gonna, we've got board members going off and board members coming on and a couple of meetings coming up and some bunch of reports and stuff. What's your timeline need for this?
No, it's not, I don't need it tomorrow.
Okay.
I think the actual official book is going to be released to the public in mid-January.
But there's still.
I'm gonna be emailing the SLBD and trying to figure out what they've been reporting, since that's not what they told you. So.
Because even in their emails to us, I get an objection that that's not accurate.
Yeah.
Right.
Or, at the very least, or one or two of those emails to Mark, please, so that he has something.
No problem.
I mean, the mayor goes by what's reported to her, so,
Yeah.
what they're saying to you, I just wanted to jive with what's being reported to her.
No, I agree.
If there's nothing else, I'd love to adjourn. Camilla?
I do like what, you asked me to kind of, with donation in terms of office interactions and all, and I'm kind of like 3/4 of my way through my investigations, I guess, or my communications with folks, and I'd like to speak to you, John Paul.
Anytime.
So, and I'd like to report on that, probably between now and the meeting. Work on that, and the next public meeting.
And that would be in written form then?
Yes.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you for taking that on. Awesome, then if there are no objections, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Let me know when.
Yeah,